special streaming event, Strange Realities, to push the limits of your reality. Featuring authors, academics, researchers, occultists, experiencers, podcasters, and practitioners. All presenting fresh cutting-edge material and research.
Streaming live.
Featuring presentations by
Brent Rains,
editor of Alternate Perceptions magazine,
Aaron Goulias,
host of the Saucer Life podcast,
David Metcalf,
writer and researcher,
Alan Greenfield,
author of Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts,
Stephanie Quick,
writer and blogger,
Red Pill Junkie,
14 researcher and explorer,
Tim Banal,
host of Banal of America,
Guy Malone,
iconoclast and troublemaker,
Timothy Ritter,
host of Strange Familiars,
Kiki Dombrowski,
author and practitioner,
Greg Bishop,
author of Project Beta,
Junie Ashford,
host of 13 O'Clock,
Recluse,
host of The Farm,
Jack Montgomery,
Folk Magic,
Joshua Cutchin,
author of Thieves in the Night,
Reverend Michael Carter,
Alien Contact Experiencer,
Dr. Future,
host of Future Point,
Tony Kale,
author of Memphis Hoodoo,
Rin Collier,
Cultist,
Soraya Ascap,
host of Where Did the Road Go, John Tenney Ghost Stalkers and Hell.
all 3 days, only $20. Tickets and info available at strangerealitiesconference.com. Brought to you by the Conspiranormal Podcast, conspiranormal.com. Strange Realities.
Okay,
All
guys, we are back on the
Welcome.
stream, and we are about to play Guy Malone's presentation. And
So this is the third and final block
Yes.
of 3 presentations we're going to play
yes,
here
for
now.
a total of 9.
Hope you guys enjoyed the last 2. Those are going to be, they're automatically posted to both YouTube and our Facebook page, Conspiranormal, with an I. And you can check those out later. But hope you guys enjoy this last and final block here with Guy Malone coming up first. This is like some Roswell conspiracy.
Yep, Roswell 1947, what really happened. We have that, and then Tim and Josh's Where the Footprints End joint presentation, and then
And this was before that the book came out.
It's before the book came out. Yes, quite a few months before, and then the presentation, then the Q&A session with a few other extra people added in. So let's get to it. First, we have Guy Malone at our Strange Realities Conference 2019.
We got Guy Malone. Yeah! That's the right one. Yeah, I got it. No worries. Spoilers. Hey, thank you very much. This flannel, thanks for mentioning it. I actually bought this at the Area 51, Storm Area 51 gig a while back, along with this. So I was like, I'm going to wear it. I'm going to Nashville. I get to wear flannel. But Adam is right, and I like what he said, that we've shared some life together, way other than the paranormal or the podcasting or the conference thing. You know, I look at some of his pictures on Facebook and I see him with you guys, or, you know, out at getting drinks or out watching bands and stuff. And sometimes I'm a little like jelly, because I'm like, some of the life Adam and I have walked together has not been the fun stuff, honestly. It's okay to say, I hope so, is that like when I divorced, Adam was there helping me move my furniture out, you know, and so he's been there with me. And then, you know, lo and behold, a couple years later, I'm helping him move his furniture out in the same situation. He came to Roswell a couple years ago as well, when I was doing a conference there. And he and Rob, they helped me set up chairs for my conference, because I didn't have minions or anything. And I was pleasured for him to come get me at 7 a.m. and I got to set up some chairs here with him. So there's more than synchronicity. There's more than overlapping interests or whatever, callings even, you might say. There's a friendship with Adam and I that I'm real proud of seeing what he's done today, because I know for years now, putting on an event and a conference like this has been his dream. It's been on his to-do list. It's been a goal. And I'm proud of him for doing it and for running it so well. And I'm especially proud just to be included as part of it. So thanks very much for that, Adam. That's awesome. Thank you. He is, yeah, good job, Adam. He is, yeah. He's seen this talk in Roswell. The original version of it is actually 90 minutes. I'm going to try to cut it to an hour today. For all I know, it'll be a better talk with a half hour cut out. But if I'm passing this out because I encourage you to come to Roswell sometime for our Galacticon UFO Festival. You've heard of it. On the back here, these little QR codes will take you to my YouTube talk of this, Roswell 47, what really happened, the longer version. If you feel I leave something out or I don't quite, I'm arguing, by the way, for the man-made view of Roswell. This makes me one of the most popular people in Roswell that I do a public lecture, even in front of MUFON groups and during the Roswell UFO Festival, proving that it was not aliens. And I don't get lynched or booed usually or hauled off stage. I've done this in front of some of the more professional ufologists who have books on these topics, and they don't sit there in the back and go, whoa, you forgot about this or you left this out. It's kind of interesting in Roswell. I was thinking the other day that even when you're in this community, the paranormal, the UFO, you may have extremely different views from some of the people that you're sitting with or nearby, or that are also sharing the stages with you. But when we all go back to our regular jobs and our regular lives, we don't talk about any of this stuff there. So when you come to these events, you're actually sort of, even if you hate the other person's views, you're sort of among family. There's a community here that even in Roswell or speakers I disagree with, I find it's, if anybody's old enough to remember the old Wile E. Coyote cartoons with the sheepdog, not the roadrunner, where they spend all day fighting each other, but then at the end of the day, they clock out and go have a beer together. That's how some of this paranormal community is. But we're kind of outcasts in our normal lives, our jobs. So it's good to come to these things. And even if you don't disagree, I hope not to have, even if you disagree with me, I hope not to offend you. Appreciate you being open-minded enough to hear when I'm doing what really happened in Roswell 47 with a question mark. Adam published it, I think, with a period or without the question mark. But I'm boiling down and introducing you to the research of myself and many others on findings that just haven't been that well known for most of the 70 plus years since the original incident happened. I'm going to argue that aliens were not being covered up in the Roswell 1947 incident. I'm going to argue that aliens were the cover-up of some very horrible things going on at the hands of our own U.S. government that, especially at the time in the 40s, people just would not have believed that we were capable of as human beings or as a so-called morally righteous nation. But I'll skip a couple slides here. That's Welcome to Roswell there for you. We sell this stuff left and right. So the fact that I don't get lynched or booed, I'm really good at promoting Roswell. I want you to come. There's lots of other stuff year-round to come for. But I'll jump ahead. I do not certainly at all believe that the Roswell incident was simply a weather balloon, as the Army Air Force stated in July of 1947. If you can't read that, the Roswell Daily Record reported the next day, after the more world-famous headline of the UFO crash, the incident, that General Ramey emptied the famous Roswell saucer. The article reads, General Ramey says disc is a weather balloon. An examination by the Army revealed last night that the mysterious object found on a lonely New Mexico ranch was a harmless high-altitude weather balloon. So that was the official story reported after they retracted the UFO disc from the first slide. And that was their story for 50 years. The military and the government, they wouldn't comment on it further, and a true veil of secrecy went around the event. And you might know already that people that even slightly in the know on this, they were ordered to never speak of it again, even to the point of death threats. And one radio station threatened to lose their license. They had to keep their mouth shut. So the town went silent about it. Mac Brazil, the rancher who originally found and called in the 1947 wreckage, he stated in the Roswell Daily Record article that he had previously found 2 other weather balloons and reported them to the authorities, but that what he found this time in no way resembled any of them. And over 20 years ago, in the 1997, the U.S. Air Force came out with what is now known as the Project Mogul balloon explanation from their infamous 1997 Case Closed book. This was offered as their final official word on the Roswell incident, and they admitted that they were in fact lying in 1947 about the weather balloon story, but that they were lying to cover up a different type of balloon. The Project Mogul is now the official explanation from the Air Force, and in agreement with anybody you've heard of, bigger than me, Stanton Friedman, Don Berliner, Don Schmidt, that both the 1947 and the 1997 explanations, the official ones offered by the U.S. Air Force and government, they're full of holes enough to be classified as a ridiculous fabrication. If there were only three choices, the top secret mogul balloon, the weather balloon story from the original 47, or from the alien disc, I would actually argue that the alien hypothesis is the most believable based on the reported evidence. But there is now, good 15 years, a fourth hypothesis that's gained a lot of ground. I'm one of many people presenting it. I started in 2002 with the RoswellUFOcrash.com, which you can still get a lot of these PowerPoints and text and government documents. You can fact check me on that. But I think it's reasonable. If you're going to live in Roswell, New Mexico, and then during the UFO festival, when people come to town from all over the world by the thousands to hear about the aliens, if you're going to get up in front of rooms full of people to offer a different interview, it's got to be pretty solid and pretty well documented, I hope. And it made some news. I shared this with Nick Redfern. Anybody here familiar with his view on Roswell? Good. We're very similar in the view. And also Mike Heiser, PhD, who's also, all of these guys have spoken in Roswell. That is a conference that Adam was and Rob were in attendance at, where Nick and I presented the man-made view of Roswell. So we shared a headline, and again, neither of us got booed or hauled out of town. Instead, it's front page news. And to their credit, they gave us, even though this is what the town sells for a living, they gave us, a fair shake on equal time. But the facts that everybody, I'm going quick here, that everybody agrees upon: in July 47, an unusual craft crashed in the desert of New Mexico. 2, the Roswell Army Air Base was involved in recovering the craft and possibly bodies. And then on number 3, July 8th, the Roswell newspaper published a front page article reading RAAF captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Following orders, the military recanted the flying disc press release just hours later, claiming it was a weather balloon. And number 5, what everybody agrees on is that the government has been lying to us about it ever since. One good example, this is their literal explanation for the bodies reported in the Roswell incident, that they called them crash test dummies, was their U.S. Air Force 1997 case closed explanation for the reports of bodies in Roswell. Stanton Friedman pointed out real quickly, though, that these dummies were not even invented until after 1947, and they weren't used for anything by the military until 1953. That's so easy a fact to verify that it left many people knowing the Air Force was lying, again, on purpose. And they actually wanted it to make it easy to figure out that they were lying. So what I put out is that unofficially, even with the first press release in 1947, they want people to think the incident was extraterrestrial to cover up some very ugly proofs, actually. Starting with Operation Paperclip. This is the official U.S. Government photo from 1946. It's 104 German scientists, Nazis, who were moved here to the United States immediately following World War II. They were Nazi scientists, and this is very well known now. It wasn't then. And in the 40s, it was actually illegal that they were even here. And I often tell people, you could just Google Operation Paperclip and Nazi UFOs, and just start with the Wikipedia entry where this picture comes from, and you will convince yourself of the logical conclusions to what I'm presenting without me doing the whole talk. You could walk out and teach yourself this stuff on YouTube or on Wikipedia. And that's how well documented all these puzzle pieces are now. But these guys were originally moved to Fort Bliss, Texas, where this picture was taken, and then to White Sounds Proving Grounds, New Mexico. And many of them were previously working on very interesting and advanced flying craft prototypes for Adolf Hitler in the closing years and even months of World War II. Among those in this picture is Wernher von Braun. He went on to head NASA's rocket program. If you're my age, 50-ish or older, you know the name pretty well. He became an American celebrity. And historians now tell us that before von Braun, these others came to America. Had Hitler gotten his working prototype flying machines off the ground that these guys were inventing at the time. Had they got them into mass production, and I'll show you some more photos, that the Allied forces would have lost World War II. The best early book on the subject is by Linda Hunt. It's called The Paperclip Conspiracy and Secret Agenda. And there's also one you can look up, Tom Bauer's book called The Hunt for Nazi Scientists, published in 1987. I'm zooming through these quicker. They're the most famous books, but the back cover on this one actually says, as the Allies moved into Germany, the full scale of Nazi research achievements burst upon them. They grabbed weapons, instruments, tools, files, and above all, scientists. I'm a little ahead. And then they also got Linda Hunt's book, that this book would not exist except if it were not for the Freedom of Information Act. This is all pre 9/11, where you could, if you knew the right questions to ask, you could get a lot of information on secret classified stuff. This is pre 9/11. This is pre John Greenwald even, that these books used as their sources to document that the government brought in scientists illegally. The gist of all this was that in the closing months of the war, they stumbled across such amazing technology that the U.S. wanted it. So these scientists were secretly brought into the United States under a media blackout program that paper clipped fake biographies on top of their Nazi crime dossiers, because President Truman at the time was personally and adamantly against putting certified Nazi criminals on the payroll. Truman's order expressly excluded anyone found to have been a member of the Nazi Party and more than a nominal participant. Now, if his orders had been followed, said restrictions would have rendered ineligible most of the scientists that this group is the precursor to the CIA had identified for recruitment, including Wernher von Braun and Arthur Rudolph, who were previously classified as a menace to the security of Allied forces. So the President of the United States, said these guys were not allowed in the country. In short, the CIA did it anyway. And they lied to him about it and covered up the fact that they were here in New Mexico and in Fort Bliss, Texas, here to develop advanced aircraft for our government. This is a more recent BBC News article, Project Paperclip, Dark Side of the Moon, from 2005. It's okay that we know about this stuff now, but it says that they specifically moved them here to exploit German scientists for American research and to deny these intellectual resources to the Soviet Union. There's a couple brief excerpts that the U.S. hired Nazi scientists to lead pioneering projects such as the race to conquer space. These men provided the U.S. with cutting-edge technology which still leads the way today, but at a cost. And BBC actually refers to our B-2 stealth bomber as a modern clone of the Horton. And the caption under the photo that they have in this same article that I'm kind of whizzing through, again, you can get the whole more drawn out history of this just on YouTube, roswellmission.org. And, don't at me, if, bro, if I leave something out here. But it was our B-2 bomber, the BBC, in the red underlined text here, it says that the stealth bomber was actually based on this German science technology. It was the U.S. and Soviet Union, which in the first days of the Cold War found themselves in a race against time to uncover Hitler's scientific secrets. Thus, Project Paperclip began. And the details of his associates were brought in. They had their backgrounds, their alleged crimes covered up, and their backgrounds bleached by a military which saw winning the Cold War and not upholding justice as its first priority. And then this BBC article includes the picture of what we now know as the stealth bomber, one of our most classified crafts, probably from the 80s, is when some of us might have heard about it. But this refers readers back to a World War II German craft, the 1944 Horten HO-229, as being, where I underlined in red, arguably the first stealth aircraft. And part of the popular mythology, which I call it nowadays, associated with the Roswell incident is the idea that our stealth aircraft, the B-2 bomber, was back engineered from Roswell 1947's crash shift crashed ship, but it's now known that that's just simply not accurate. The BBC referred to our stealth bomber, the B-2, as a modern clone of the Horton. And the caption under that photo reads, "Stealth bomber based on a 1944 design." Sorry, spoiler. So the alien crash version of the Roswell story is that the B-2 bomber and pretty much all of our stealth technology was reverse engineered from that crash. In some crowds, even sharing this detail is kind of bursting a bubble, but it's extremely well known now by historians and aircraft technicians. And then the second article from November 16, 2005 suggests that what modern UFO advocates refer to as the truth embargo did not begin in 1947, as a lot of people postulate. It's kind of weird, but I'm saying that the real cover-up with the Roswell crash began in 1945. Sounds a little counterintuitive. How could you say that the 47 crash cover-up began in 1985? But what's implied by that article is that the front page of the New York Times, I skipped some of these for the sake of time. Let me get ahead. The program's architects, backing up, before 1945 were sometimes willing to build upon the results of often deadly Nazi research on captive human subjects. Aviation doctors suffocated gypsies in pressure chambers. And this is the Nazis that we brought into America. And force-fed Jews nothing but seawater for weeks to determine what pilots could withstand. And the New York Times, backing up, said that reporters were warned away. When these guys came in on the ship, literally to New York, the precautions were taken to keep their arrival secret. The reporters who went on board the ship and found the 88 men at the time, these German scientists, they were waiting to land. They were, quote, warned away at the bottom of that slide there. That's what the New York Times reported. Reporters were warned away. So the arrival of the Nazi scientists who were here to teach the U.S. how to build advanced aircrafts was covered up beginning in 1945. The military was already telling the press, you don't want to report this. Men who had just 7 months earlier had been at war with the United States were being ushered onto our shores by the government, the purpose to jumpstart American high-tech industry. The program's architects were sometimes willing to build on the results of often deadly Nazi research on captive human subjects to determine what pilots could withstand. Forgive me. So by early the next year, 150 scientists were working across the country at locations like Wright Field, Ohio, Fort Bliss, Texas, and White Sands Proving Grounds in New Mexico. Here's some other pictures. I'll flip through without the commentary. I often do. There's more of it on the longer video. This is National Geographic. Hitler's stealth fighter recreated. Looks a lot like our modern B-2 bomber. Bada boom. Just skipping through these without a whole lot of commentary. Archive photos. Some of them are models. One of them might even be Hasbro. And then back in the 40s, I was going to say the Nazis were allowed to experiment on humans to figure out what pilots could withstand. But the program's architects, it says, were sometimes willing to build on the results of often deadly Nazi research on captive human subjects. Those experiments and paperclip itself were among the first manifestations of what became a guiding principle of the Cold War, that the end sometimes justifies the means. And they were brought here because the Soviets were also exporting the German scientists to Russia. South America was also taking them with them as well. So you can sort of understand that in that era, why under no circumstances would the information that we had Nazi scientists on our tax roll, taxpayers, be allowed to get out to the American public? Because we've seen Saving Private Ryan. What if you had just lost 2 sons fighting the Nazis? How could you react in 1947 to finding out that they're living in the United States and eating well back on your tax dollars? All that I just read or breezed through introduces a topic I'll be getting back to later. The paperclip scientists were brilliant in technology, but they were willing to perform experiments on human subjects too, specifically, as you saw, to determine what pilots could withstand. So all those pictures I went through there for you, just to breeze through without some of the commentary. But we know Germany had these vehicles in prototype production prior to the end of World War II. But does that necessarily mean the American military had them also? What's all this got to do with Roswell, finally? So here's some more documentation from before the 2005 articles I read from, before the BBC and the American magazines were publishing this information. This is a 1946 document. It was originally in Mike Heiser's website, a declassified stamp now at the very top of it. It originates from, of all places, Wright Field, Ohio. If you look at the right top underlining in red letters. Can you read that where you are, most of us? Wright Field, Ohio. Does anybody know why Wright Field, Ohio is important in this discussion? Patterson, yeah. If you really know the details of the Roswell story, the wreckage was taken to Wright Field, Ohio. Ultimately, the modern mythology is that it's at Area 51 now. Maybe it is now, but in the 40s it was taken to Wright Field, Ohio. And so there's a connection. This is where the Roswell debris wound up. And I added the red text so you can read the small type of the reporter's title. It's unclassified, but this is the cover page of a document that proves the U.S. Air Corps had a working knowledge of the German flying wings designed by the Horton brothers and was authorized to begin work on them in the U.S. at Wright Field in 1945, 6, and 7. Here's a picture off of Wikipedia of one being unloaded from a train in August of 1945 in the USA. The Wikipedia caption reads, "Unloading the captured Horton Ho V3 in the USA." And the Wikipedia entry ends by saying that during the final stages of the war, the U.S. military initiated Operation Paperclip as an effort by the various intelligence agencies to capture advanced German weapons research and to deny that research to the undergoing Soviet troops. The Horton glider and the HO-229V3, they were undergoing final assembly, were sent to the Northrop Corporation in the United States, which had been building flying wings since 1939. That's off Wikipedia. So I'll ask, why is this important? Of course, all this preamble to get to where we are now is, number one, if you didn't work for the Northrop Corporation or for the United States military compartment that brought this aircraft over here from Germany in August 1945, if you weren't privy to Operation Paperclip in the 1940s, the clandestine operation being carried out specifically against the president's orders. So that's a very, very small number of people that would have known any of this. If you weren't part of that, you didn't know that a craft of this type even existed, and much less made it to the United States for R&D. But number two, the incredibly important reason is, who here recognizes this guy? You know who this is? I'm looking in this back in the speakers or somewhere. Yes. Brent. Yes, Kenneth Arnold, the pilot, very famous guy now, who in June 1947 said that he witnessed some amazingly fast airships over Mount Rainier in Washington State. And it's important to note that he described their flight characteristics as skipping like a saucer in June 1947. And as a result, the press in America first coined the phrase flying saucer based on pilot Kenneth Arnold's testimony, which is kind of wrong. Many researchers today will point out that Ken Arnold said it skipped like a saucer, not that it looked like a saucer. What he drew here was obviously not saucer shaped. Flying saucer is a term that the press coined. And when did the press coin the phrase flying saucer? It was June 1947. The Roswell Daily Record and others reported that a flying saucer captured on ranch in Roswell region in July, a month later less, in July 1947, And flying saucer wasn't based on a physical description of the craft. It was just the phrase already made popular by the press. You saw Timothy Renner earlier today. We're talking Sasquatch and Bigfoot today, but it was gorilla, it was wild man to the press before the term Bigfoot finally made it into the American lexicon. Same thing with a UFO. Before that, it was flying saucer, but it was not, it was just the press came up with. So the Roswell Daily Record and others reported the flying saucer captured in July 1947, not based on a physical description. And I ask you to keep your eyes on the screen here, because now that we know that these guys, the Operation Paperclip Nazi scientists from Germany, on Wikipedia, you can mouse over and get all their names now. That's how public this information is now. You mouse over their head and their name pops up. But now that we know that these guys, Nazi paperclip scientists, were working on reproducing these types of craft, there's another Wikipedia entered on the Horton. They were working on these types of craft for the Americans to use, and that the paperclip scientists were spread across these locations: Fort Bliss, Texas, Wright Field, Dayton, Ohio, and of all places, White Sands Proving Grounds, New Mexico. I'm challenged to say, who would argue that what Kenneth Arnold described in 1947 was really from outer space? Side by side, German 1944 vehicle, what pilot Ken Arnold witnessed in 1947, and the media said, coined the phrase flying saucer. A lot of people that know their Roswell incident history already know that the craft recovered around the Roswell region was not actually round or saucer shaped. That's Hollywood, and that's movies that have come out since then. But the main books on the Roswell incident that got everybody's attention over 20 years ago were Crash at Corona, not at Roswell, by the way. The wreckage was brought to the Roswell Army Air Base, but the actual crash site is in Corona, like the beer, New Mexico. So Crash at Corona, and then The Truth About the UFO Crash at Roswell by Kevin Randle and Don Schmidt. But of course, they've for decades now argued for the extraterrestrial explanation of the incident, of course. The Kevin Randle and Don Schmidt book, or books, however shown here, are the basis for this 1994 movie. Who remembers the Sheens? Yeah, Roswell, the UFO cover-up from 1994, which Randle and Schmidt are also actually credited with the writers of that movie. Now, I have in my possession personally, like because I've met them in Roswell, some original drawings by a gentleman named Frank Kaufman, who served in the Roswell Army Air Base's 509th Bomb Squad in 1947. He claimed to have been involved in the cleanup of the wreckage and the bodies. The images he drew, this image is his alleged first-hand eyewitness testimony of what he cleaned up, or at least says he saw. And you can see from the version of the craft that he drew is also not round, but it's more manta-shaped than circular. And very important here, the note from the book, UFO Crash at Roswell, depends largely on his testimony. He's Mr. X in the book at the time. His name wasn't released. But under the caption of Don Schmidt's drawing, based on Kaufman's witness testimony, the craft that crashed at Roswell was long and narrow. It was not a flying saucer. The most important influential book on the Roswell UFO crash states by the author that it was not a saucer. It was just long and narrow like this. So back to Kaufman's drawings and what he allegedly saw. He published in the book Roswell 1947, I Was There. You can get it on Amazon still. By Robert Shirky and Frank Kaufman. They worked together on this. Kaufman was the artist, Shirky was the writer. And the quote I gave you earlier, that the Roswell crash was long and narrow, was based not only on Frank Kaufman's description, but it was also in conjunction with other witnesses. But back on track, we do know for sure that the U.S. had scientists here working from German designs. We do have real pictures of the Horton that I've shown you. There's yet another German prototype. It's called the Lippisch P-13 that we only have sketches and models of, because while the Nazis were starting to work on this prototype in 1945 when the war ended, before anyone can verify any of these were actually built. But here's a model by fantasticplanet.com of what one would have looked like had the Germans gotten one operational. It's rumored that they did, but I can't verify that. If it were built, though, it would have looked like this. So the very same German aircraft scientists who were designing and building and test flying both the Horten craft and arguably this Lippisch in late World War II were then brought to the United States in 1945 to top secretly designed advanced aircrafts for the Americans. Kind of a slam dunk, I feel sometimes, that just like the Ken Arnold flying saucer that you think we're looking at on the right, what a witness testimony from Roswell drew and said, this is the craft he cleaned up. You compare it to what the Germans were building in 1945. Do you think he was cleaning up an alien craft, or was it a US-based model based on German designs is the question. Because it's either really amazing how close those Germans got in World War II to designing ships that look amazingly like an extraterrestrial craft that didn't arrive until 1947, allegedly, or perhaps the other explanation is that maybe the German scientists who originally designed the Horten and the Lippisch in 1944, given 2 years of living in the US with secret labs and a blank check from Uncle Sam, maybe they developed a spiffier model by July 1947. Just maybe is my hypothesis here. And there's always a part of me sometimes I just wish I could sit down and let the defense rest at this point, because I think I found over the years that about a half or 3/4 of the people that sit through this much of the lecture, and trust me, you've gotten the short version, they're pretty content to say, well, mystery solved. The Roswell crash actually wasn't aliens, it was us. But if I were to quit now, many people will bounce back to some questions about the bodies and the fantastic metal that were found at the crash site. Because I sure did when I first got into looking at this, living in Roswell in 2002. The point is, I've lived there long enough. I'd heard from people I knew, trusted, well, my uncle, well, my grandfather, well, this happened, and they told him to shut up, and there was death threats. So after living there several years, regardless of what I believed in general, I just really realized these people weren't lying. There was something being covered up. And if it was aliens, I had to be honest with myself. Maybe like even in the point of prayer, God, am I wrong about this? So I started just looking for, if I'm wrong, change my mind. I kind of want to know what the truth is. And so the question about the bodies and that testimony, is it valid, came up, and the metal that was found at the crash site. So if you know more of the story than the general public, and if you're honest, you too are going to come back to those questions as well. Maybe the craft, slam dunk, but come on, there's more to the story. So for my own sake, I had to answer these questions, and just to be honest, and about the metal and the bodies before I went public with any of this in 2002. And I've introduced the topic of human experimentation on purpose by the Nazis, because this takes a little dark turn later on. A little more for your research, won't have time for it. Hitler's flying saucers, those are actual photos from World War II era. Project UFO with a K. Joseph Farrell is very good, by the way. He's been on Coast to Coast. The article I quoted you earlier mentioned that some of the Nazi scientists were taken to South America in addition to Russia and the United States. Farrell thinks the Roswell crash actually originated from Argentina, but was the same man-made technology nonetheless. The point is merely presenting that I think there are valid arguments that the craft in 1947 didn't come from outer space. So I've concentrated mostly on the Horten model and its resemblance to the Kenneth Arnold saucers, but there are other ones out there you could look at. There's a UFOs video that I'm not going to play. Okay, but it does show, that is a History Channel, Nazi UFOs, German video, that on that, if you look at it on my YouTube, you can play. But most flying saucers had already become a buzzword in 1947 because of the media. So much of the furor and the hoopla surrounding the immediate global response to the 1947 Roswell Daily Record, their first article, was precisely because everybody already knew that these amazingly advanced airships were being seen across the United States. They were reported on nationally. And so the scoop of the century really did come when the Roswell Daily Record headline read, Roswell Army Airfield captures flying saucer on ranch in Roswell region. Again, Timothy Renner today, when he said the Bigfoot and the airships, they're just a little bit ahead of our technology. What would the people of America experienced in 1947 with this Roswell Daily Record headline was if you lived in Pennsylvania And you'd been seeing all these headlines about the gorilla and the mystery man. And if the government said, we've captured one, we're gonna tell you what it is tomorrow. Well, what the Roswell Daily Record and the U.S. government did was, oops, it was just a raccoon. We let it go. No big deal. Mystery solved. Go back to what you were doing. That's what Americans went through in 1947. But as I've demonstrated, our government was already covering up the scientists, the fact that they were here and that we were trying to beat the Russians to developing all this advanced technology. We had other secrets to keep as well. So if there's any Nazi UFO Operation Paperclip connection to the Roswell incident, I honestly don't think 1940s American society really wanted to know that we had over 100 Nazis living here on a secret military base, working for us, even if we did sort of have to defend our new title as the undisputed world champion superpower that we were. With the president and the top military brass sure as heck didn't want to own up to Operation Paperclip either, especially given that the president's explicit orders were disobeyed and circumvented by the group that would become known as the CIA. So, cover story. I think that the moral outrage of the fact getting out in the 1940s about these Nazi scientists would have been at least as bad and divisive an issue to our country as the Vietnam War was decades later. And after World War II, we had the Cold War starting up, and all the evidence suggests that the Soviet Union and at least a half a dozen other countries were recruiting these scientists and taking them to the technology to their borders. Where would we have wound up today if we hadn't done the same, brought these scientists in and developed this aircraft? So it's a tough call no matter how you make it, but there was an arms race gearing up in a Cold War. And I tried to look into the heads of the people who would have made all of these decisions back then. That brings me to the video and some other stuff that I skipped through. But the true facts are now in 1940 to 45, Nazi scientists were aggressively developing amazing flying machines. Number two, in 1945, the U.S. moved them to Texas and White Sands Proving Grounds, New Mexico. And number three, an identified flying object crashed in the New Mexico desert. The military enforces the greatest cover-up of any event ever discovered by the general public. So the question becomes, what about the bodies? I've introduced a little bit the fact of human experimentation was just part of what the Nazi scientists were guilty of before they came here. Links from my website there's an article on George Washington University's National Securities Archive page that documents the human experimentation continued afterwards on U.S. soil. It's just a plain text document that matter-of-factly discloses the paperclip scientists as well as radiation experiments they conducted in the United States after they were here at the Air Force School of Aviation Medicine in the United States, addressed to members of the Advisory Committee on Human Radiation Experiments, George Washington University. You can see it, gwu.edu in the top. It reads in part, the Air Force's School of Aviation Medicine, SAM, at Brooks Air Force Base in Texas conducted dozens of human radiation experiments during the Cold War. Among them, flash blindness studies in connection with atomic weapons tests, data gathering for the total body irradiation studies conducted in Houston, and the experiments for which Nazi investigators were tried included many related to aviation research. These were mainly high altitude exposure studies, oxygen deprivation experiments, and cold studies related to air-sea rescue operations. The information about air crews hazards was important to both sides. It continues by saying that a number of military research sites recruited paperclip scientists with backgrounds in aeromedicine and radiobiology. The portfolio of experiments at the U.S. Air Force's School of Medicine included total body irradiation, space medicine, flash blindness studies. So the Air Force Surgeon General and SAM officials welcomed paperclip scientists in March 1951. This is human experimentation as a matter of routine 4 years still after the Roswell incident, written in 1950. More first-class scientists than the highly qualified technologies from Germany welcomed the paperclip scientists. So this document was still online last I checked. It's a famous one now. And And I think it's kind of sad. I think it's kind of damning, in effect. But it's a sad but true part of our American history that our government has at many times experimented on humans without their knowledge or consent. There are many lists of these acts online. Here's one from rents.com from 2003. All of it is easily verifiable. I like going into detail on it, but not today. You can look it up and you can get it off my site later. That's a long list. So in 1997, John Glenn is recommending legislation that you and I have to be informed at any time that the government or some corporation even wants to experiment on us. This should be kind of shocking, but it's a cold hard fact that the US government and anybody really had carte blanche to experiment on humans, on American citizens without their knowledge or consent because there was a lot of loopholes in the legal system. Senator Glenn pointed out in his speech that definitely includes the earliest days of the Cold War and the period between 1945 and July 1947. So relating, he actually says, he began to ask the question that there needed to be a law. There is no law on the books requiring that informed consent be obtained. I believe there is a need for such a law. I find it devastating that even after Nuremberg, we still don't have a law on our books requiring informed consent. So finally, Mr. President, blah, 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 blah. So once you're not afraid to go where I did, and I don't think many Americans living in 1947 would have even dreamed that this was possible, that human experimentation was being conducted by the American government on American citizens without their consent or knowledge. There definitely becomes a few possible explanations for the bodies, the reported bodies that have arisen in the Roswell incident too. And the most well-documented, which I'll share with you in just a moment, from UFO researcher Nick Redfern in his 2005 book, Body Snatchers in the Desert. I didn't know him very well when I was writing my website in 2002. Much less that he was following some leads himself, working on a book about a man-made explanation of the Roswell incident that he came out with 3 years later. But I put forth on my site a total shot in the dark, honestly, a hypothesis about the bodies. And that being 2002, I don't honestly remember exactly what inspired me to do this, but I was aware that human experimentation had occurred and that often institutionalized people, like those who wouldn't be as readily missed, were sometimes the targets of this type of research or experimentation. So I simply went on Google, and based on what some of the prominent Roswell witnesses and storytellers claimed, I typed in symptoms: large, bald head, big eyes. And I learned for the first time about progeria. And as I wrote on this website, I hope I've never been more wrong in my life. But children with progeria usually have these features: dwarf, bald head, large head with small face, prominent eyes. Results in rapid aging of children, disproportionately small bodies given the size of their heads. The children are thin with baldness. The average lifespan is the early teens. The first symptoms are diminished growth as the children turn old within a remarkably short time. Their change in appearance can be shocking. The head is disproportionately large and bald. So all that math did kind of add up. That's Nick Redfern. All the math did kind of add up to me that there were Nazis on U.S. soil, a Cold War to win, Nazis who were doing human experimentation, experimental craft, and progeria victims was just one original line of thinking I posted in 2002 on that site as a possible explanation. But Nick Redfern and Mike Heiser have both come forward since then that the people in the crashed ship could have been other human unfortunates, like POWs, radiation victims, like we just shared, were popular experiments, and other possible explanations. And I had Nick, just as I didn't know him well, but I knew his reputation. I had him review my site in 2002, and I posted his reply because I was honored to hear from someone like him. But he said he would agree with me that all the Roswell bodies were human is a very real one, but there was a book being planned by two authors. It's called Iceman Down, that was shelved. But the only problem he had with the progeria hypothesis is that progeria is extremely rare. would the Nazis or us have been able to acquire 5 people with progeria, similar appearance and similar height, all in 1947? Good comeback. He's not the only one I heard that from, but apparently he looked into it a little bit more, and it turns out that the last chapter of his now famous book in 2005 is his chapter 9 is called Progeria, where he expands on this, and I'll read you one thing later on. From Mike Heiser's website, it starts by saying, the view taken in his book, The Facade, is that the Roswell crash of July 247 was in fact a paperclip accident. So this is an actual government archive picture he posts, but not from 1947. It's later than that. But the Facade argues that the object recovered at Roswell was an experimental craft modeled after flying discs designed during World War II by Nazi engineers under Operation Paperclip. The designs and the know-how were exported to the U.S. out of some of the same Nazi technicians who had begun the project in Germany. There was therefore some sort of connection between Majestic 12 and Paperclip. The Facade further argues that the bodies recovered at the crash were human unfortunates, Mongoloids, Asians, progeria victims, etc., deemed worthy of the kind of human experimentation required for testing high-altitude craft. I'm going to have to skip from reading Mike's review of Nick's book. There's a lot. You can freeze frame it for free on the webs on YouTube, roswellmission.org, and then just go to the videos, or if you're high-tech, scan your phone on that little yellow card I'm bringing. So what this all adds up to, a later email to me from Nick Redfern, RE, the whole Japanese angle. Several people have said to me, old timers, Nick says, have said that part of the secret of where the people came from is a place called Fort Stanton. Do a Google search on Fort Stanton, New Mexico, and take a good look at its history, which includes keeping both handicapped people there and Japanese people during the war. And it's just down the road, in aviation terms, from where the debris was found in Lincoln County at the ranch, the Roswell crash. Fort Stanton has a curious and intriguing history, which definitely deserves looking into. So he did keep on digging deeper. You should read his books on Roswell. He published a sequel to Body Snatchers, if you weren't aware of that. But I'll read you in Nick's words some real government documentation, not me Google searching, but real government documentation regarding the types of humans who in general were, in fact, being experimented on literally in 1947 by the U.S. government. 10 minutes? You got it. One paragraph from Nick's Progeria chapter. One other critical piece of evidence officially links such conditions as progeria and dwarfism with the activities of the Oak Ridge National Lab elsewhere in the summer of 1947. More specifically, the report focused on results of a whole range of radiation-related experiments undertaken in mid-47. 54 test subjects, of whom 15 were between 1 and 4 years of age. 7 were controls. 2 were classic cretins. 1 showed some features of hypothyroidism, which was not modified by treatment. 2 were dwarfs. 1 in the diagnosis was gargoylism. 1 was suspected of progeria, a disorder. 27 were more than 4 but less than 15 years of age. Of these two had unmistakable thyroidism, Graves' disease, and 4 were dwarfs. November 3rd, 1947, issue of the Biology Division Bulletin of the Clinton National Laboratory. Now, I'm not asking if you completely believe Nick's hypothesis about some of the kids playing into the Roswell incident or even my original progeria, but as Mike's earlier picture also suggests, I'm not asking you to believe Mike entirely either, but I do want to make you think about, especially when you see that there is a logical terrestrial explanation for the ship that was drawn and recovered in the Roswell region, is do you now believe that there could be a possible terrestrial earthly explanation for the bodies that were reportedly found in 1947 as well? And this is me really stirring the pot when I do this thing in Roswell, because the only images that back up the story about the alleged bodies that were even recovered were based on something drawn third hand in 1991, 44 years after this alleged meeting occurred between Glenn Dennis and a mystery woman. At the time of the writing of the above affidavit, artist Walter Henn drew the following sketches under the direction of Glenn Dennis, one of the founders of the Roswell UFO Museum right across the street from where I work. The sketches depict the drawing allegedly made by Dennis for this nurse. So this 1989 drawing accompanies Glenn Dennis's 1991 affidavit of his 1947 participation in the Roswell incident. And his story is a huge part of why we're all here today, because he's one of the original founders of the Roswell UFO Museum, which has been selling this version of the craft to thousands of tourists. His story is a bedrock of the foundations for how the story of the Roswell incident has always been told in most of the movies, TV shows, and the magazine articles. And he's the mortician, and I believe this part, who was called by the Army Air Base to provide for them child-sized caskets after they arrived back in town with the wreckage from the Roswell incident crash. But as it relates to this drawing, he added some details to his casket testimony, which many have publicly disputed since then. At age 65, he's remembering what he claims an unidentified nurse at the Army Air Base drew for him, a nurse that no researcher has ever been able to verify existed, and frankly, most say now that he just made up. Google that yourself, look up Naomi Self. 25 years after all these books were first released about the Roswell nurse, an artist, Walter Henn, drew these sketches for him based on what Glenn Dennis said he remembered in 1989 of this unidentified nurse's 1947 sketch, which he says he lost. Good old Wikipedia, Dennis's accounts featured prominently in Crash and Corona and The Truth About the UFO Crash in Roswell, as well as other pro-UFO books, but serious doubts about his story were soon raised. For some like Carl Flock and Kevin Randall, these inconsistencies were great enough to discount Dennis' credibility entirely. And the researchers who investigated Dennis's claims found a number of inconsistencies. And the sketches which Dennis supplied to Friedman in 1983 were discovered to have been questionable history. Dennis had not drawn them, as he claimed, but he had another artist, Walter Henn, and it ends with by saying, we can make a lot of money off of this when he went to the artist. And that is the foundation of the UFO Museum in Roswell that's been selling this story to tourists. It's a great success for years. Drawn third hand, 42 years later, that image is at the heart of all the Roswell testimonies. And I just ask, given what you see here, is that testimony credible? Because the drawings of Frank Kaufman, who I introduced earlier, who worked on the 509th Army Air Base that handled and cleaned up the Roswell crash debris, this is what he drew. It's not a third-hand drawing. He went to art school before he was in the Army. That doesn't quite look exactly as alien. It looks, unfortunately, a little bit like this. It's a progeria kid. So every drawing of the Roswell bodies that you have came from third-hand, half-remembered 40 years later. But we also know that this is the type of people the U.S. government was actively experimenting in New Mexico in 1947. Adam actually sent me this. 2 years ago, he informed me of this. A progeria kid actually played in the Aurora Encounter, a 1980s movie about an alien crash. But would you put it past our government to use someone like this in an experimental craft just to see what the effects on the human body would be of perhaps never before achieved altitude and speed or radiation in the upper atmosphere, the kind of radiation you need to power a nuclear powered plane? But we're not going to put Chuck Yeager, our best top scientists or pilots, in ships like that when they're experimental. We all know the story is you start with dogs and chimpanzees and you work your way up when you're doing experimental stuff like that. It's sad, but I just ask, is aliens the only possible explanation for any dead or dying bodies that might have been found at the 1947 crash site? It makes me sick to say the answer to that question is no, it's not. There was a Cold War going on. Apparently both sides felt that it had to be won at any cost. And there's also the third metal with exotic properties. I'll whip through some PowerPoints, refer you to my YouTube video. I won't go into it for the sake of time, but this metal called, and that's another video that shows a memory metal being crumpled just like reported in 47, going back to its shape. It's called nitinol or nitinol, depending on your accent. Wikipedia entries on the memory-shaped metal date back to discovered in 1932. The records of it were lost by the Air Force. Memory metal files still missing. Blog, there's that again. I commend the original Roswell people for thinking outside of the box in the sense that you had bodies, you had metal, you had a craft that there was no explanation for in the 40s. But today I say the box is bigger than the people in the 40s knew about. Do we need to go outer space, all the way to outer space, to fill in all the blanks of what is genuinely, honestly reported by sincere witnesses in Roswell? I'm afraid we do not. I'll end here just for the sake of time and let the next one go on. But thanks for listening. There's more online, roswellmission.org, and then I have a whole second talk I do on Roswell, more on the theology, biblical stuff of aliens. It really dovetails real well with what Joshua Cutchin is doing today, too. Big kudos on that lecture. I'll get out of the way so you guys can take it home today. Thank you. Yeah! Thank you. 2 more pages. Sorry. Thanks, bro.
Yeah, thank you, guys. That was really good. Okay, we are going to take about a 10-minute break, but first we have the last trivia question of the night. And you guys can win the book version of Pocket Future by this guy, Mr. Joe. And whoever wins this will get it signed, a signed copy, right? You guys sign it? Okay. All right, you want to do the question?
Want we do mama first?
If you want to do it with your mama.
Let's do that. All right, we're gonna do one more Yo Mama, at least, maybe more. I don't know. All right, let's see. Everybody likes them. Yo Mama's like a nail. She loves to get hammered. All right, that's mama joke. My mother's anniversary today. This is a good time to be picking. Good time to be doing that. How do mummies relax? Yeah! Snap into a Slim Jim. That way. All right. What's our final question?
Let's do this one.
Okay, cool. All right. Final question of the evening. What strange ancient writing that was left out of the Bible describes fallen angels coming down and mating with humans? Anybody yell it? Yell it. That's it. What'd you say? That's it. Is that right?
Who said it first?
Rip the book in half. Everybody gets half. All right, you get it? All right, you win 2 prizes. Not only do you win a book, but you win a raised toilet seat with a lock to read your book on. Because if you're going to invite Bigfoot over to your house, you better have a lock on that toilet. Am I right? Am I right or am I right? I'm right. There you go.
Okay, guys.
Don't be like a tramp. Don't be like a tramp. Don't be like a tramp.
In a few minutes, we have the joint presentation with Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Renner on where the footprints end, and give us about roughly 10 minutes.
Okay, we're back.
Welcome back.
And that was Guy Malone giving his awesome presentation on Roswell 1947. What really happened?
It's really heavy stuff.
Yeah, that was really heavy stuff, and he didn't even get to do the whole thing. Like the one that I saw him do was like 90 minutes long, but because of our our time constraints. So go check out his stuff, and he actually is going to give that other presentation that he mentioned. He's going to be giving that at the 2020 event, which is coming up September 25th, 26th, and 27th, and is only $20 to attend over a period of 3 days. Okay, so what we got up next?
We've got Tim and Josh's joint Timothy Renner and Joshua Cutchin's joint presentation. This was before the book The Footprints End came out, and they shared a lot of that material with us and gave us a preview. And I just want to say that that's going to be what Strange Realities 2020 is like, as far as a lot of these speakers are going to be talking about unpublished stuff that you haven't read yet, haven't heard yet, a lot of people's cutting edge research. So that's going to be really cool. And this was we got a great preview of the stuff in the book all about Bigfoot and folklore in this joint presentation with Timothy Renner and Joshua Cutchin.
All right, guys. Without further ado, check it out.
What did you want me to call it? What was it? Bigfoot?
We're the Bigfoot Power Couple.
Bigfoot Power Couple. Yeah. Joshua Cutchin, Timothy Renner, give it up. They're coming up here now.
Yeah.
And this is not on. Before we start, I have to point out, as a Bigfoot nerd, while this is a lovely picture, that is a duck-footed Bigfoot.
That's true.
And that rarely ever happens. The prints are usually one in front of the other. Like Bigfoot.
Yes.
Yeah, so we are the Bigfoot Power Couple. As with any power couple, they're lovers squabbles, but always power through at the end of the day. So this is going to be a little bit of a preview of our books entitled Where the Footprints End, Volumes 1 and 2. Tim and I just recently decided that Volume 1 is going to be dedicated to looking at Bigfoot through a folkloric lens. And Volume 2 is going to be looking at sort of the oddities that you find in research. I've been chastised by my good friend Greg Bishop for saying this, but I'll say it again here because I think it sort of provides a flavor as to what this book is. I think Tim as well are sort of approaching this as sort of passport to Magonia for Bigfoot. Giving a little, oh, there we go. Sort of filtering some stuff through some mythology and some folklore that people have not thought to filter it through. And Tim's portion of this talk is a perfect example. What do we mean when we say weird Bigfoot? I mean, Bigfoot's weird anyway, right? We're referring to a set of oddities that simply should not exist if Bigfoot is indeed an undiscovered relic, very humanoid. Namely, footprints with odd numbered toes. Toes that numbered in 2, 3, 4, 6. These things are not unheard of, especially 3- and 4-footed prints. Bigfoot that seem to vanish or disappear, or appear as some sort of cloaked predator-esque figure. Bulletproof Bigfoot, animals that just simply don't even react when you shoot them. Obviously, there's some caveats to be made vis-a-vis large animals and the caliber of bullets that you need, but a lot of times these creatures show no reaction whatsoever. Anomalous lights, seen in conjunction with Bigfoot, as well as associations with fairies, women in white, as Tim will be talking about here in a moment, ghosts, witches, and UFOs. Yeah, there's actually a strong similarity between witch lore of Europe and Bigfoot, if you can actually believe that. But Tim's portion of this is going to begin with a topic that when he first told me about it, I sort of rolled my eyes and poo-pooed him a good bit because I simply didn't believe there was a connection there. And it's been one of the most rewarding avenues of inquiry in this new project of ours. So without any further ado, there's a good Tim behind every Josh. Tim Renner.
I'm going to take a drink before I start.
Me too.
So, Women in White, I started noticing this connection between these women in white apparitions. Not always apparitions, sometimes they appear to be real, solid women in white that are acting strangely and are otherwise showing up around Bigfoot sightings. And like strange lights and black dogs, other weird phenomena, these women in white seem to be appearing around Bigfoot sightings with I'm a frequent guest. And if you like Sasquatch Encounters, it's the gold standard. That podcast it's just nothing but sweet, sweet Bigfoot encounters every week. But they had an episode on which the fans have come to call lovingly the Two Brothers episode. I believe the actual episode is called We Need Help. And these guys started noticing this weird woman in white, which I'll come back to that later. But they were having an incredible number of Bigfoot sightings, and then this weird woman in white. But it kind of tipped me off to this idea, and some other people in the Sasquatch Chronicles forum started saying, you know what? I saw Bigfoot, and then I drove up the road a mile, and then I saw this weird-looking homeless woman that was dressed in white rags and stuff. So I just kind of put it in the back of my head, and then I started seeing more and more and more connections, and I really began to think it was a thing when I started noticing it on my own investigations. I do a lot of on-the-ground Bigfoot investigations myself. It's taken me years to get to the point where people in my area call me now when they see Bigfoot or have an encounter. And I do a lot of that. And this woman in white thing started coming up in my own investigations. So when you think of woman in white, other than the typical ghost, you probably calls to mind virginity, like the wedding dress and all that. And there's a well-known quote from the 1600s, which equated maids and apes. And Thomas Campion was a lute musician. He did not come up with this quote. This is his version of a very well-known kind of saying from the time. And it's, they that yet have not fed on delights amorous, she vows that they shall lead apes and Avernus. Avernus, of course, being hell. And the she in this quote refers to Proserpina, who during the Renaissance time would have been equated to the queen of the fairies. So here we have a fairy connection and connecting this virginal woman in white to an ape. And the idea of this is kind of an anti-Catholic sentiment at the time. Basically that women that died virgins would be punished in hell, and to lead an ape, and everyone would have known this back at that time. It's kind of faded from our language at this point, but that would, of course, at the time it meant to have intercourse with apes. So that was thought to be the most terrible punishment for to be in hell and to have intercourse with apes.
The variation of that appears in a Shakespearean play, is that right?
Yeah, it was all over, like the 1600s, it was super well known. Yeah, it was originally, like I said, this kind of anti-Catholic sentiment against celibate priests and nuns. And then it became sort of a way for guys to get laid. You know, they'd quote this at ladies, eventually like, hey, you don't want to die and go to hell and have sex with apes.
Try that in the morning, so. I mean, is it ape on earth or is it?
So these women in white apparitions, these ghostly women in white, they're one of the most commonly seen apparitions worldwide. Every ghost hunter runs into 1,000 stories of, oh, it was a woman in white, it was a woman in white. There's of course the French La Dame Blanche, which is the almost institutionalized over there, these women in white specters that they see. There are fairies and many other folkloric entities are known to wear white. And women in white and Bigfoot, they do share common ground, both geographically and thematically.
Just to point out the fact that that's your art, since you probably won't do that. So.
That's my own. They're seen along roadsides, they're seen in battlefields, they're seen in graveyards. Both are seen as death omens sometimes. Both are often accompanied by strange lights. And the Banshee is often portrayed as a woman in white, not always, but often. It's worth noting that the Banshee screams like a Bigfoot, also an omen of death. And there was a Welsh equivalent of the Banshee known as the Hag of the Dribble. And she was said to flap her leathery wings against the windows. And of course, Bigfoot, if you're familiar with reports, often known to tap on windows. So. Women in white apparitions served as death omens for royal families across Europe, particularly in Austria. And of particular interest was one which was said to be the ghost of the Countess Orlamund. And she was so feared, her specter was so feared, and they were so curious about this ghost of this woman that kept seeing. They opened her tomb in 1701. And all they found inside was a leather shoe sole, a brown habit, and most interestingly, what they described as a gigantic jawbone. So we don't know if it was a jawbone of a creature or not, but I thought that was very interesting. We're talking about giants and women in white, and they find a gigantic jawbone in her grave, in her otherwise empty grave. Another woman in white of interest is one that was said to haunt Rosenberg Palace, and she had the name of Bertha. And this becomes particularly interesting because Bertha would have been the medieval form of the name Perchta, and Frau Perchta was the Teutonic moon goddess. And finding Perchta solidified this woman in white and Bigfoot thing to me. I think she might be the sort of woman in white, that seed of all this Bigfoot and woman in white connection. There's an old woodcut of Perchta, and it's thought to come from Old High German, possibly meaning the bright one. And a lot of legends claim that she only ever wore white. She's wearing some white there, but a lot of legends said she would wear white. She could appear as young and beautiful or as an old hag. She had an affinity for children, as Bigfoot and fairies do. And she was said to call children from the wilderness, like many Bigfoot stories. They have them either learning kids' names or otherwise calling to them, motioning to them to the forest. And those that followed her calls never returned. So one or both, and this is very interesting when it comes to the three-toed tracks, one or both of Frau Perchta's feet were said to be quite large. She had oversized feet, and they took the form of a swan's foot, which if you think of a swan's foot, that would appear as three toes if you were looking at it as it went around. So the most telling thing about Perchta is her entourage. She was followed around by the Perchten, who were a horde of frightening wild men, black-faced and hairy. They were either furry or clad in animal skins. They came from the wilderness to scare men and disturb towns. They are connected to other Christmas wild men like Krampus. You might recognize the kind of Krampus look to him, and our own Pennsylvania Belsnickel, which is very much connected to these wild man sightings. And the other part of Perchta's entourage, which is incredibly interesting when it comes to the Bigfoot phenomenon, are the Heimchen, and they were the souls of dead children who had answered Perchta's call, and they manifested as will-o'-the-wisp lights. And of course, we have many, 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 many reports of Bigfoot and orbs together, or at least orbs seen before and after Bigfoot sightings, or around the same locations where Bigfoot is seen. So, there's a chapter on everything. This folkloric expression of women in white was not limited to Germany with Perchta. I started looking all around the world, and as I've said before, it seems like every culture has their wild man, and a extremely disproportionate number of these wild men have a female counterpart of some sort that is white or wears white. So in Apollonia, which is modern Albania, lived something called the Sasabansum, and it was known as the friend of the witches, which is, there you have another witch connection. It's said to be gigantic in stature with long straight hair. The female form of the Sasabansum was called the Shamantin, and was said to be of great height and white in color. In Serbia, there was the Sumska Majka, and I'm doing my best on the pronunciation of all these. Who was known as the Forest Mother. She was very much like Perchta. She could manifest young and beautiful, or as a hag with large teeth. She could also take the shape of an animal. She only appeared at night, much like, well, not that Bigfoot only appears at night, but a great majority of the sightings are at night. She has an affinity for children, and she either appeared naked or dressed in white. The dramatic Darren Lieb, did I do all right on that? Bible. She's one of the woodwives with these wild women, and she was chased by the wild hunt, which is, of course, a horde of wild men, essentially. She also wore white. The Klaus Lieb, also dramatic, gigantic in stature. She was wrapped in dingy white grave clothes. She uttered lamenting cries in the night, and she was said to lean on the roofs of houses. And this is another theme that we have again and again with these folklore creatures throughout the book. They get up on roofs for some reason. So it's a strange detail to note. But again, in modern Bigfoot reports, people again and again will say, it climbed on my roof. I heard it running around my roof. So this is another drumbeat we hear again. I was able to, recently someone said, just sent me an email and said, check out the Apple Tree Man from England, Somerset, England. The Apple Tree Man's a wild man. He was said to inhabit the oldest tree in the orchard. I believe this is another Christmas wild man. You were to pour cider on his roots at Christmas time. And the Apple Tree Man guards the orchard, and he is aided by a ghost, or sometimes they say his wife, who is, of course, a woman in white. In the southern part of the United States and Mexico, we have La Llorona, who is the crying woman. And it's often suggested that the crying or wailing associated with this entity has been Bigfoot, and it was actually on a episode of Finding Bigfoot. They said that in Louisiana, the La Llorona, they said her crying was a Bigfoot cry. And while they are not always clad in white, they are often portrayed as clad in white, La Llorona. And like Perkta, they kidnap and kill children. So near where I live, and I learned of this when I went on a Bigfoot investigation, and I mentioned just briefly this idea that I was interested in these women in white apparitions in connection with Bigfoot. And this is right outside of Michaud State Forest, which I mentioned earlier. I met a witness there who had multiple Bigfoot encounters. He had one Class A encounter where he saw a creature, and two other encounters, one of which he got screamed at or roared at. He insists I said it's a roar. He got roared at, but he took me around the corner from these sightings, quarter mile as a crow flies, maybe, to a pond in an area called Pond Bank. And this is sort of Pennsylvania's own La Llorona, the White Lady of Pond Bank, and she was said to have drowned her baby and then herself. She sits on the edge, the Pond Bank again sits on the edge of Michaud Forest, which I said is top 10 places to see Bigfoot in the United States. If you want to see Bigfoot, it's a good place to go. And it's less than a mile from, actually, now I've documented several Bigfoot encounters, not just the one the guy took me to. So there are other cases of women in white, modern cases, and Bigfoot. The Sasquatch Chronicle episode I mentioned before. These two brothers, they lived near each other, and they were having repeat encounters with Bigfoot creatures. And they started noting the strange hag-like woman in white that they saw too. They thought she was a homeless woman walking through their neighborhood. She acted very strangely, and they believed that these Bigfoot creatures were living up on a ridge behind their house in the woods. And they said she was walking by and just headed up to that ridge one night. And they said the creatures, they thought, were making a bunch of noise up there, and they tried to stop her, said, don't go up there, and she ignored them. She walked up there, and then they saw her heading back in the morning. They approached her and stopped her, and when they stopped her to talk to her, she disappeared from their eyes, they said. But a strange detail they gave, they said, other than her being dressed in these like dirty clothes, they said she looked like a homeless woman, was they said she wore shoes that appeared to be too big for her feet. So it looked like big clown shoes. So again, we have this giant foot Perkta thing with her. Another place is battlefields, both Gettysburg and Chickamauga in Georgia. have these women in white specters and Bigfoot. And Chickamauga, the woman in white there's always a story with them. It's always like a mourning fiance. I think this story is similar, if not the same, in Gettysburg, the woman in white there. This one in Chickamauga appears also with weird lights. He supposedly carries a torch across the battlefield. And there's a creature there known as Old Green Eyes. It's a hairy ghoul, they called it, was seen eating corpses supposedly during the battle. So we have this big hairy thing and a woman in white association. And one of the most amazing things that we found, at least to me, I think, during the course of this was the Fred Beck's Ape Canyon account. And we were talking about Ape Canyon before and had the trivia. Luckily, that trivia question came before this. The answer was in there. 1924, and most Bigfoot literature will tell you that, there were these miners out in the woods and they saw an ape-like creature and they shot it, and that night they were attacked by a bunch of creatures. And that's all you get, because the reports have been highly edited. And if you go back to the original miner who was there, the one who wrote the book about it, his name was Fred Beck, and he wrote an amazing account. And he said there's so much more to it than what it sounds. It's a very, very strange account that began with a white arrow in the sky. They saw what they said was a gigantic Native American ghost that directed them to follow a white arrow through the sky. Now, white arrow in the sky, are we talking about a UFO? I don't know. And when they say gigantic Native American, I don't know, that was exactly how they described it. They didn't give any more details. But on the way as they're following this white arrow, they met another female spirit. And this spirit's name was Vander White. They did not describe what she looked like. They did not say she was wearing white, but her name was Vander White. This arrow leads them to a gold mine. So we have this idea of treasure and a mine, another underground mine thing. And they have multiple encounters with Bigfoot leading up to this attack, to them shooting them. But they didn't start by seeing the creatures. They started hearing them. They heard a lot of things like strange voices. They heard underground machinery. They were finding things like 2 footprints by themselves in the middle of a sandbar that was an acre wide. And even back then, they quoted, and they said, it looked like something picked it up, whatever made the footprints, and dropped it in the middle of the sandbar and then picked it up again. Because they could not find any footprints that led to or from these 2 footprints in the middle of the sandbar. Disappearing trackways, single tracks, these are a thing. These are many, many examples of this with Bigfoot. Fred Beck also reported apports, which are items disappearing and appearing. The one he mentioned specifically was he needed a pencil. He had a very certain specific pencil that he had at home, and it appeared in his hand when he needed it. These strange kind of phenomena that are often associated with poltergeist phenomena, Josh will be talking about in just a minute. But needless to say, this Ape Canyon incident is maybe the best example of this kind of weird washing that the Bigfoot community has done in many of these cases, these landmark cases. There's a lot of weird stuff that's just been whitewashed over. My own investigations led me to a man named Jimmy in Lewisberry, Pennsylvania. He called me and he said he had a Bigfoot sighting. So I had a Bigfoot sighting 2 days ago. You're gonna think I'm crazy. I said, I don't think you're crazy. I said, I'll be there tomorrow. I will go as soon as I can. I'd like to get there. I'll get there within minutes of the sighting if I can. I want to get the best, freshest evidence I can. So I go out there, I do all the normal Bigfoot stuff. He had seen him across the pond from his house. He actually saw true creatures. Some months later, his wife saw another one. I'll get to that. But I do all the normal Bigfoot investigation stuff. And if you've heard me on the podcast talk about finding skulls on multiple Bigfoot investigations, this was one of them. Right where he said the creatures were standing, I looked down and found a skull. That's a whole other story of weirdness. But when I got done the investigation, I'm just kind of talking to Jimmy a little bit. He says, you want to hear some other weird stuff? I said, yeah, of course. I was like, yeah, that's what I do. well, my house is haunted. Oh, okay. Tell me about this. And he starts to tell me about all this poltergeist activities. Things are running on his roof. Things are knocking on his wall. Again, this is all poltergeist activity that Josh will tell you about, also associated with Bigfoot. And he started showing me pictures of these spirits that he caught. And he gets to this one that he photographed in a mirror, and sure enough, it looked like a woman in a white dress. And he had no idea about this connection at all, and I'm just blown away by this, when he shows me this picture. So his partner lives months later, I'm there for a follow-up, and she says, I didn't believe this, I didn't believe Jimmy when he saw this, but I saw one the other day. It was running across, there's electric lines by their house, and I saw one, but it was white. So, she saw a white creature some months after that. Kelly and Aaron from Charm the Water podcast, if you're familiar with that. Kelly had started seeing a hag-like woman in white entity in a dingy white dress. As soon as I heard them say that, I thought, you're going to have a cryptid sighting. You're going to see something. You're going to see a cryptid. And within days, they had seen something that answers the description of a devil monkey, maybe a white baboon-like creature they saw shortly thereafter. I went on another investigation in Maryland late last year, I believe it was. And the report I got was a woman had seen a big black dog, which she thought was too big to be natural. She was calling it a werewolf. But when I got there, she had gathered her neighbors. She works with the public. She's an awesome witness, probably the best witness I've ever had. She was fearless about talking to her neighbors about this stuff, and she kind of gathered all of her neighbors in this almost like, finding Bigfoot like town hall for me. And they're all telling me these stories and stuff they've seen around the neighborhood. And the neighbors were seeing Bigfoot. She had not, but the neighbors were seeing Bigfoot. And, they led me around the neighborhood and took me to the woods and stuff, and showed me tree structures and this and that. And, again, the normal Bigfoot stuff. And kind of at the end of the day, I asked questions like, well, what else weird do you have around here? Are there ghosts around here? Are there weird lights? And of course, there were weird lights. They answered yes. And I was not surprised at all. But then she said, one night I was sitting on my couch and we were watching TV, and this woman in white just came walking up our driveway. And again, she knows nothing. I told her, I don't tell witnesses about this connection. I wait till they drop this stuff. And it happens with surprising regularity. So they've seen this, they called it a ghost. This woman in white just came walking up their driveway. Her neighbor then proceeds to tell me, he's like, oh, I've got a story about a woman in white. Now, he'd seen Bigfoot several times, and he was in an area where we had previously seen Bigfoot. He was hunting, and he said, this is just out of nowhere. This woman in white walks out of the woods, and he had thought she was just a natural woman, but he did not know why she was there. She paid no attention to him. She did something on the ground and left. He went to see if she had left something on the ground. He was under the impression that she was doing some sort of ritual. He climbed out of his tree stand and went to go look at what she was doing, and she came back. And he said he just kind of froze, and she came and picked up whatever was on the ground and walked out. He said he followed her out like 5 feet behind her the whole way, and she didn't even, not once did she turn around or look at him or anything like that. But completely unsolicited Bigfoot and women in white stories. And they keep coming. I can't stop them. Today I was told that Osiris was a hairy guy, and his wife, Isis, known to wear white. So this happens all over the world. I haven't found any in Asia yet, but I'm confident I will. I'm confident I'll find an Asian wild man with a white wife or counterpart. And with that, I'll hand it off to Josh, who's going to talk about poltergeisty stuff.
Yeah. So what I'm going to point out has been addressed by multiple people before. The similarities between Bigfoot and poltergeist phenomena. Although just as with aliens and fairies, I'm not sure anybody has completely realized how deep this particular rabbit hole goes. Wildernessgeist will come around to it, but that's a term that I came up with that Tim adopted for an animal. Stole. But it's okay, it's going to be real popular soon. So the BFRO Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization defines Class B reports as reports where a possible Sasquatch was observed at a great distance or in poor lighting conditions and incidents in any other circumstance that did not afford a clear view of the subject are considered Class B reports. So it's Bigfooty type stuff. What we're dealing with are tossed rocks, wood knocks, vocalizations, footprints, anomalous odors, etc. These all quantify Class B reports. They make up quite a bit of the BFR database. However, these are also things that we would expect to find in poltergeist reports as well. And if you don't see a Bigfoot, who knows what it was? This is the Diriba family from Chilliwack, British Columbia. In 1951, Ukrainian immigrant Anna Diriba invited her niece over and experienced knocks on the walls, breaking windows, etc. Started up again after the niece returned after a short stay. To quote Sheriff's Officer A.J. Edwards, it is ill-advised to make it, to quote him, I've heard the sounds on 4 occasions. In each case, they had come as rapid, violent rappings on the outer wall near a window. All persons in the house were within my range of vision on these occasions, with the exception of Miss Diriba's teenage niece, who was asleep in her bedroom. Each time I ran outside, but could see no one, although the house was fully floodlit. On the 4 occasions when I heard the sounds, they came between 8 p.m. and midnight. I am told they have been heard regularly during the day as well as night. Windows have been broken on several occasions, including 1 kitchen window, which was broken after it had been protected by a wire screen and a sheet of plastic. As Tim alluded to, you will find no shortage of Bigfoot reports where Bigfoot allegedly tap on windows. It seems as if a lot of these things are connected. What is a poltergeist? From the German poltern, to knock, and geist meaning spirit. The attitude on poltergeist has changed over the years. At one point it was considered an actual spirit. Generally speaking, the parapsychological community nowadays believes that it's an outward manifestation of psychokinetic energy from a focal point. Typically a youth, typically undergoing something like puberty, typically female, but not always by any stretch of the imagination. Here's some more similarities that were compiled by Alan Gauld and A.D. Cornell in 1970. They took about 500 cases from the 19th century. 64% involved the manipulation of small objects, including movement, disappearances, and apports, which Tim referenced, or spontaneous transfers from one location to another. 58% peak after nightfall, 48% involved rapid sounds, 36% included movement of heavy furniture, 24% exceeded 365 days, 60% featured communication between poltergeist and parent agent, and 12% involved opening and closing doors and windows. So that's just an overview of poltergeists as a concept themselves. So I think we need a new vocabulary to address poltergeists that do not necessarily have an agent at play and do not occur in the house. Hence my coining of the term wilderness poltergeist, which I define as a theoretical parapsychological framework for understanding anomalous woodland activity experienced in the absence of an explicit Bigfoot sighting, using concepts pioneered in the study of poltergeists. Unlike its housebound cousin, the wilderness geist manifests outdoors, but presents nearly identical phenomena and is more likely to be encountered in areas with common sightings of large hairy hominids. I'm not saying Bigfoot doesn't throw rocks. I'm not saying Bigfoot doesn't run across roofs. I'm not saying Bigfoot doesn't tap on windows. But unless you see a Bigfoot, who knows what it was? Tim mentioned Fred Beck from the Ape Canyon sighting. Fred Beck, to his dying day, was considered, what he himself considered the Ape Canyon attack and the entities involved to be purely psychic in nature. Of course, this view of an experiencer of such a profound encounter was dismissed by a lot of the Bigfoot community. Rene DeHinden, one of the most prominent Bigfoot researchers of the 20th century, said he thought Fred went a little odd in his old age, which is one of the most disrespectful things you could say to an experiencer, in my opinion. To give an idea of why this concept is important, there was a Mississippi habituator. If anybody doesn't know what that term is, it's someone who claims to interact with Bigfoot on a regular basis. Had a site 50 miles from his home, and he was chased out of his woods because he actually forgot to leave some food behind for what he believed were Bigfoot. 50 miles later, that night at 11:30, something hit the side of his house. He had all sorts of activity, including acorns being thrown at him, Are we to believe that a large hairy hominid has tracked him over 50 miles in the course of several hours? Seems to push the levels of believability to me. It almost seems like he was more of a focal point than any sort of creature itself.
But if he on his bumper.
Is that what some people say?
Yeah, that's one of the feet on his bumper.
Yeah. Oh. Bigfootery, I try to love you, but it's so hard sometimes.
Yeah.
So to put this into perspective, what I'm saying regarding Bigfoot and poltergeist activity is that all fish swim, but not everything that swims is a fish. If that's sort of a useful analogy. We see this phenomenon worldwide. This is actually from a reporting by Tony Healy on high strangeness as featured in Yowie reports. Yowie is the Australian analog for Bigfoot. In 1946, George Knott and his family moved into a long abandoned property near Wilcannia, and they heard thumping sounds in the ceiling. Doors swung open, objects flew, and so many pebbles fell on the roof that they sounded like a heavy rain. At the same time as this classic poltergeist phenomena, huge human-like tracks appeared in the yard, and a large, very irate ape-man began to invade the house, once trying to drag Mrs. Knott outside. We're to be led to believe that this is complete coincidence, that these two phenomena would manifest in the same place. I am not, as Art Goldfinger said, once is happenstance, twice is coincidence, and 3 times is enemy action. That's a James Bond reference. So let's talk about some of the things that are associated both between Bigfoot sightings and poltergeist sightings, and how they are relatively underappreciated. Primates do indeed throw rocks. This is known in parapsychological literature as lithobully. And there have been cases of Bigfoot being seen throwing rocks, but it should be noted that there are plenty of cases where people are pelted with rocks in the woods and they don't see Bigfoot and they assume it's Bigfoot. Perhaps this is something a little bit different. To provide some context for this, the Minerva monster that terrorized Minerva, Ohio, back in the late, I believe it was the late 70s, was known to inhabit a ridgeline behind the Caton family's home. And it would be seen sometimes pacing up there, but oftentimes the Caton boys claimed that they would actually take rocks, mark a giant X on it, and throw it up on the ridgeline, and the rock would be thrown back. Same rock, they knew it was because they had a little X on it, but they said that the rock would be warm to the touch. Now, many people would assume that this has something to do with a primate actually handling a rock in its body heat, making a heat transference. However, if you look at the parapsychological literature, you will find that rocks and other similar objects that appear thrown in poltergeist phenomena are almost always hot or warm to the touch. One of the most prominent poltergeist cases was the Humpty-Doo poltergeist, which is a hilarious name that I love to say, from Australia. This is a piece of glass that was thrown during that particular case, and the thermal imaging reveals how it actually came back thrown, and you can see the heat dissipating. It's one of the best documented poltergeist cases on record. House wrapping and running. Tim has alluded to this in his portion of the presentation, but it's very common to find Bigfoot witnesses to claim that they have heard Bigfoot running along the roads of their houses. One of my favorite examples comes from Little Switzerland, North Carolina, which is actually a place that my family likes to go on holiday. I remember the Bigfoot Field Researchers Organization report says, it's a house in Little Switzerland. I don't want to say which one, but the hilarious thing is that Little Switzerland is literally a cul-de-sac. Like, it's got a post office, there's a lodge there, and there's like 8 to 10 houses. But this particular individual was just sort of, joking around and started doing some wood knocks in the woods. And that night, they not only had slaps on the side of the house, but also something that was running along the roof. And people would assume that this is Bigfoot, but he didn't see Bigfoot. It matches with a lot of poltergeist activity. This particular engraving is probably familiar to some of you. It's the 1661 Drummer of Tedworth poltergeist, which featured raps of hoarse, disembodied voices, apparitions, and foul smells. It was called the Drummer of Tedworth because the raps were one of the most common features of that particular encounter. Footprints. I've received a little bit of pushback from some people who say that if you are arguing that things might be perhaps archetypal or parapsychological, how do they leave hair? How do they leave scat? How do they leave this? How do they leave that? And some people actually solve these things, but that represents a gross misunderstanding of the parapsychological literature. Ghosts leave footprints. One of the most common means of determining whether or not a place was haunted was to leave down talc powder and wait for the ghost to leave footprints. Ghosts leave handprints. You ran into somebody who was looking for ghost hair, right?
Ghost hair. Yeah, I had a ghost investigation recently, and the guy said, I used to put baby powder out and get footprints. I left the mirror out, and I got fingerprints. And the next thing I'm going to do is leave ghost hair and leave the brush out. Leave ghost hair, and I said, you know, we're doing the same thing, right? I'm just doing it in the woods, and you're doing it in a house, and it was like, no, he just didn't register.
So whenever somebody wants to, to offer the idea that physical evidence like hair is evidence that Bigfoot is a flesh and blood creature, it's easy to counter that with all these other things, including the idea that maybe we should view hair in Bigfoot reports the same way we view ectoplasm, et cetera, and seances and whatnot. $1 to anyone who can tell me whose toe that is, whose foot that is on the Bigfoot cast. Anybody? A white shack? Yeah. Okay, it's Lauren Coleman's foot, actually, exhibiting that the Celtic toe, which is the second toe being longer than the first, appears in 10% of the European population.
That's the only involvement Lauren Coleman had.
Don't get me started. Oh, Tim, being naughty. To provide an example of how these phenomena sort of parallel poltergeist and parapsychological phenomena, there's a book that was released recently by Janice Durham called The Handprint on the Mirror. She claims to have experienced numerous contacts from her dead husband, including this footprint that appeared on a couch that she claims was, quote unquote, significantly oversized and very large. On Strange Familiars, Tim's podcast, he had a similar footprint appear in the basement of a witness that was a singular footprint, very large as well.
Wow.
So the idea that it's supposedly her husband's footprint, but it's bigger than her husband's footprint, I think is significant in some sense. Disembodied voices. I was gonna play the Sierra sounds, but I think it'll be quicker and more entertaining if I do it myself. Ron Moorhead and Al Berry are some of the most important figures in our field, even though I disagree with some of Ron Moorhead's conclusions. But they both were the originators of what have become known as the Sierra sounds, which are alleged recordings of Bigfoot. There's a large breadth of literature and studies that have been done on these particular recordings that seem to have evidenced the fact that the voices recorded could not be produced by the human vocal tract. But to approximate that, and to give you sort of a laugh, I'll try to do it now. So stuff like that.
That was good.
So,
Yeah.
And now you all know what I do when I wake up at 3 in the morning. Just practice my Bigfoot noise. Anyway.
I heard that.
The Bigfoot is a representation of the eschaton.
However, having said that, so this is a common motif that you hear in a lot of contemporary Bigfoot reports, known as samurai chatter. It's this guttural, often compared to Asiatic languages, which is another rabbit hole we can go down at some other point. But if you compare the description of the Sierra sounds, or that depiction of the Sierra sounds, to what the late great Colin Wolfson said about disembodied voices in poltergeist cases, you'll find a strikingly similar comparison. They do not sound like ordinary human voices, at least not to begin with. They begin in a guttural voice that sounds as if it is made up from grunts and groans. Colin Wilson is someone who I don't think gets enough love nowadays, so if anyone wants to look into that.
About like the weirdness that was going on at the Sierra camp in this?
In this, no, I don't. So yeah.
The Sierra camp, where they recorded the Sierra sound, is another one that your Flesh Blood Bigfoot love to point to, because it's great evidence. Those recordings are amazing. But Al Berry wrote a book, which I like to call the great uncle, maybe, or the grandfather of our book.
So good.
It's called Bigfoot, and it's from 1976. So he was on this a little bit earlier than us, and he documents a ton of strangeness that was going on up at that Sierra camp. Now, Ron Moore has begun to talk about it in recent times. In other times, he didn't deny it, but he just didn't talk about it. But Al Berry, right from the start, was talking about, and again, poltergeist activity, knocks, rats, weird light, just this whole range of phenomena other than Bigfoot they were experiencing up there.
Yeah, and the thing I mentioned, Ron Moorhead, who deserves all the accolades that we can give him. My main problem with him is that he's looking for answers where I just want to sit with the messiness of the mystery, as Terrence McKenna said. If you look at sort of a list, I'm going to try to be a little bit briefer with this, but if you look at the sort of list of sounds that appear in these Class B reports where something isn't seen, but you hear it, they line up almost exactly with poltergeist encounters. Heavy breathing, whistles, very, very common. And I've got examples of all these, so if anybody wants to, any examples come to me later. I'm just trying to sort of shave off some time here. Heavy movement and laughter, both from unseen sources. Scratching and tearing. One of the strange things that happened in the Sierra camp was that they actually heard a sound like canvas ripping, and it seemed to come from somewhere inside their shelter, but there was nowhere to be seen as the source of this noise. And again, there are countless examples. Animal noises, one of the things people talk about Bigfoot being able to do a lot is imitate animals. Oftentimes, just slight of being absolutely perfect. So in other words, the owl sounds too big or something sounds a little bit off. Animal noises are common in a lot of poltergeist encounters. To give an example of large hairy hominids imitating things, a Chinese farmer in 1977 observed a wild man that uttered, quote unquote, 11 or 12 different sounds: a sparrow chirping, dog barking, pony neighing, leopard growling, and an infant crying among them. Bigfoot is often described similar skills in North America. The Epworth Rectory incident, which is one famous poltergeist case, involved turkey cockles. So see these similars. Odors, buy my book. I'm not going to go over that here, but my book, The Brimstone Deceit, talks about all sorts of odors, not just sulfurous odors, but all sorts of odors in regard to ghosts / spirits, aliens, Bigfoot, and sort of all general entities you'll find in Fort Tiana. But having said that, sulfurous odors, specifically sulfur dioxide and hydrogen sulfide, are very common in both ghosts and Bigfoot reports. Animal fear. Dogs fear both poltergeist and Bigfoot. The Epworth Rectory, which we mentioned, poltergeist so troubled the Reverend's manservant in 1716 that he took the family mastiff to his room. The first evening in his care, the dog barked violently before the noises began, only to whimper and flee on each subsequent evening. It doesn't take long to get into Bigfoot research before you find the same thing happening with Bigfoot having this antagonistic relationship with dogs. There are plenty of examples of this, but one that I found particularly compelling was a May 2015 dog. The dog survived, so don't freak out at this next picture. It's a little bit explicit. On Wadmalaw Island, South Carolina. The official explanation was that it climbed up to a branch 15 feet in the air and somehow self-impaled. I don't buy that, but whatever. The historical context regarding Bigfoot was not mentioned in the news. The fact of the matter was that 33 miles away, dogs were killed in a 1970 Bigfoot flat.
So in the 1970s, around York County, where I am, a researcher named Bob Chance, who's been doing this forever, gave me access to his files, and one of the reports talked about German Shepherd dogs being torn in half and found 15, 20 feet up in the trees.
Very common thing. We mentioned apports and disapports. These are apports from the skull experiment on the left, Centrohoma poltergeist on the right. I won't go into quite what that means, but the fact of the matter is that a lot of these apports and sort of objects that you see are mirrored directly in the Bigfoot gifting scene. So we have here poltergeist apports on the left and the right. Here we have Bigfoot gifts. I didn't have any pictures of some stuff, but there are things that have appeared as apports, like coins and pebbles and even toys that also appear at gifting sites. What I mean by gifting is somebody leaves Bigfoot an apple and Bigfoot leaves a feather or a bone or a rock, or like I said, sometimes they leave behind a toy and you don't see the Bigfoot, but something with hands had to pick up this food that I left or open the peanut butter jar and had to leave something else behind. So the assumption is Bigfoot. My primary point is that we shouldn't assume it's Bigfoot, and even if it is Bigfoot, there's a big center to that Venn diagram between poltergeist phenomenon and Bigfoot. Enter wilderness guys. That's not what I wanted next. Let's talk about vandalism. So this particular picture is from Snellgrove Lake. It's Encounter in 2002. Some of you might have seen this on an episode of Monster Quest. Site of heavy Bigfoot activity, some very odd Bigfoot activity, including singing Bigfoot, which yes is part of the book project as well. But the entire cabin was turned upside down. You compare this to traditional representations of poltergeists, and you can see the comparison. Sort of explains itself. Electrical interference. It's a little bit more of a ghost thing than a poltergeist thing, but it's very common for batteries to drain in the presence of ghosts. This is a major trope that you see on a lot of different ghost hunting programs. And again, Ron Moorhead had a similar experience happen at the Sierra site. We had our cameras, all something go wrong with them. Our batteries would go dead up there. Scott Nelson, the cryptolinguist that wrote it there, he would have his batteries failing. He went up there with enough batteries to last forever, but also they wouldn't work. My batteries, my brand new lithium batteries, this is 2011. I was by myself when I heard this big pop right outside my tent. I really think it might have been something digging a tree, like I originally thought, but maybe something energetically coming out of the tree. When I heard the chatter later, I tried to turn my recorder on and the batteries were dead. Brand new lithium batteries. I just put them in when I got there. I checked them and everything was fine. They wouldn't work later. But obviously it's a monkey, right? It's that energy sapping monkey that we're dealing with. Anomalous lights, your mileage on orbs may vary. Mine certainly does. Some are worth looking at. A lot are bugs and dust and ephemera. Having said that, anomalous lights appear in poltergeist cases, in ghost cases, in seances, which are another means of manifesting a poltergeist via medium, producing wraps, so ectoplasm, etc. They're also seen in Bigfoot sites. The truth is the truth, whatever truth is. The predominance of this at Bigfoot sites is actually finally emerging. I think, to Wes's credit, I think he's done a lot on getting the word out on that. Experiment from Sasquatch Chronicles. I had a video I might have played, but we're not going to do that. But there's an interesting conflation between fairy folklore, Bigfoot, and anomalous lights in Wirt Sykes's British Goblins from 1880. The Elidan is a species of elf, exactly corresponding to the English will-o'-the-wisp, which Tim mentioned, the Scandinavian Lichtgub, and the Breton Sandian Itan. The Welsh word Don means fire. Don also means a lure. The compound word suggests a luring elf fire. The Sanditan, St. John and Father, is a double ignis status fool's fire fairy carrying at its finger ends 5 lights which spin around like a wheel. The Negroes of the southern seaboard states of America invest this goblin with an exaggeration of the horrible peculiarly their own. Sorry, that always trips me up every time I read it. They call it jack-o'-lantern and describe it as a hideous creature 5 feet in height with goggle eyes and a huge mouth, its body covered with long hair, and which goes leaping and bounding through the air like a giant grasshopper. Superhuman leaps are very common in Bigfoot lore. This frightful apparition is stronger than any man, swifter than any horse, and compels its victims to follow it into the swamp where it leaves them to die. Something along those same lines should be addressed about hairy poltergeists. Many cases of entities conjured forth in seances involve hairy digits, hairy appendages, even full-bodied apparitions of creatures. There was a 2001 South African poltergeist which included sightings of a hairy ape creature with sharp nails. The famed medium Frank Klusky materialized a quote-unquote mysterious ape during a seance in the 20th century. During the Battersea poltergeist case, the couple's daughter, 15-year-old Shirley, experienced a sensation of something hairy in her bed one evening. When her father awoke, the sheet and mattress were ripped to shreds. During his 1902 seances, medium Auguste Politi levitated a table, produced anomalous lights, and touched sitters with a hairy hand, all while bound at the neck, wrists, and feet. Stan Gooch had a seance in the 1950s in Coventry, England. quote unquote, this is Gooch there, by the way. This was a crouching ape-like shape, which became clearer as the moments passed. I guess it approximated to what most people's idea of what an ancient caveman would look like, yet one could not make out too much detail. The eyes were hidden, for example. It stood in half shadow, watching us, breathing as heavily as if nervous. I must say, though, that I sensed, rather than heard, the breathing. I could not decide whether our visitor was wearing the skin of some animal or whether it had a rough coat of hair of its own. So as we see, the large, hairy man creature poltergeist phenomena is far too intertwined to want to separate these out into discrete activity. Therefore, Wildnisgeist. So let's go through a couple of hypotheses about what this possibly could mean. Hypothesis A, which nobody likes. There is no Bigfoot or Wildnisgeist involved in Class B reports. I think we all agree that's unlikely. So we're just going to go by that. Although I'm sure it's possible. But hypothesis B, Bigfoot and Wildnisgeist just happen to exist in the same locations. Here we have multiple sub-scenarios at play. There might be a Wildnisgeist attached to an area inhabited by Bigfoot, or a witness finds him or herself in an area known for Bigfoot sightings and generates their own poltergeist activity. If true, it implies that Class B reports come from both Wildnisgeist and Bigfoot. In any case, this hypothesis is predicated on a complete and utter coincidence between clear Bigfoot sightings and Class B reports, which remains unlikely. Hypothesis C. Most cryptozoologists endorse this hypothesis, that Bigfoot is solely responsible for Class B reports. It is undoubtedly the simplest explanation, arguably the most logical. It is not without serious shortcomings, however, specifically the electrical interference and anomalous lights seen in some reports, unless one fully engages with more taboo theories like Bigfoot as ghosts, spirits, or interdimensional creatures, problematic concepts in their own right. Hypothesis D. Wildnisgeist are responsible for all Bigfoot reports. We jump from the least controversial hypothesis to the most. In this scenario, the Wildnisgeist is attached either to a location, explaining areas of plentiful Bigfoot sightings, or in traditional poltergeist fashion, the witness brings the phenomena with them as an agent. In either case, sightings of large hairy hominids are not flesh and blood primates, but instead projected representations of Wildnisgeists, non-physical in nature, but possessed of the ability to interact with the physical world as any poltergeist can. Hypothesis E, which is kind of my favorite. Rosemary Ellen Guiley, God rest her soul, wrote poltergeists seem to be the product of destructive juvenile or imbalanced adult minds. Wildnisgeists are poltergeists generated by Bigfoot. Plenty of sightings describe Bigfoot acting erratically or angrily, as well as displaying a playful disposition or childish behavior. Is it possible flesh and blood primates generate poltergeist activity similar to unstable human beings? As noted, poltergeist cases commonly involve spontaneous fires and anomalous writing, but are nowhere to be found in Class B reports. Is this because any mind generating a poltergeist must possess knowledge of how to create fire or writing? Or perhaps Bigfoot have found a way to harness the psychic effects of poltergeist phenomena to their own ends? And then finally, any mixture of the above. I think it should be relatively apparent from what Tim and I are talking about is that we are very comfortable sitting without having answers. And that we're definitely in that sort of Jungian archetypal playland, which I think is the aspect of research that has been the most yielding to some sense of peace in determining what these things are and all sorts of phenomena. Once you start engaging with the collective unconscious, I think it really is helpful. So this is going to be the first public unveiling. Oh, yeah. So you want to say something about it? It's your baby. Tim is a fantastic artist, as you can see from all the art that he had in his presentation, and it's a blessing to have him on a project like this. We've gone through, 5 or 6 different covers back and forth?
There's been several iterations, and what with you? You said the first one you liked, which I wasn't sold on, but I did. You said it felt kind of dangerous and something maybe we shouldn't be reading.
And the second one, you had a dorky Bigfoot.
The second one was awesome, but
But if anybody wants to see it, I'll show it to you.
But I also have this thing, so when I was 10, I'll tell a little story. When I was 10, my brother, I was very excited. I'd drawn this picture. My older brother was an artist. He was, I guess, 21 at the time. So he's an older brother. And I showed my mom this drawing I was really proud of. And my mom was like, "You've got to show your brother Mark. It's fantastic. He's an artist too." You show it to him. He gets home, and I show it to him. And he looks at it, he looks at it for about 10 seconds, and he throws it at me. And can I drop an MS here? Can I drop an MS? He throws it at me and he says, "I'm sorry, you'll never be as good as me." And my little 10-year-old mind went, "Yeah, motherfucker." But anyway, it's a similar thing when Josh is like, came back at me with, "I don't know about these other ones," so I had to, oh yeah.
But we finally came to consensus. So as we noted earlier, it's going to be 2 volumes. First volume is looking at similarities between Bigfoot and fairies, witches, the alien contact experience, anomalous lights, women in white. And then the second one is looking at more of an evidence-based approach to these anomalies, like why do footprints end? Why are there 3-toed footprints? Why are there,
disappearing evidence?
Disappearing evidence.
Plagued by disappearing evidence.
Disappearing Bigfoot. These weird vocalizations and mimicry that they can somehow perfectly do. And just sort of the logical fallacies that a lot of researchers fall into when trying to explain that, like Bigfoot tiptoe backwards through their footprints. And rather applying sort of a mythological / folkloric approach to those questions that no one has really done because they're so obsessed with capturing an ape. So without further ado, you want to click through to it?
Yeah, so this is the black and white version because it will be a colored version. It will probably be used for both volumes and colored differently for each volume.
So we're thinking different colored Bigfoot, different colored leaves, etc.
Yeah.
So this is
black and white version of what we'll use.
That's the cover for where the footprints are.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thanks to Adam and company for putting together by far one of the most organized conferences I've seen, and certainly the most punctual. So, welcome the king of strange realities. We'll do what Adam says.
If there's questions, we'll do it as part of the podcast, right?
Yeah, let's, you guys can stay up here.
Welcome back.
Yep. That was Joshua Cutchin and Timothy Ritter at Strange Realities 2019 to give their presentation of where the footprints end. Sorry you didn't get to see some of the slides there, especially that last one, but we had apparently there was some lost footage. I don't know if it was actually filmed, but so there that one was an odd one. But it is what it is. We got the whole
and
thing
of course you can see that. Yeah.
So the information
you can see that on
there.
the cover of their book, of course.
Yes, absolutely. So we are moving right along, and we are down to the very last. Well, this really isn't a presentation. This is a question and answer session with everybody involved in.
So you've seen all of them
that was there, except for Zach Hunt. He had to leave early, but we did pick up 3 more people up there on the stage. We got Brent Rains, Dr. Future, and Johnny McMahon of the Fringe Radio Network up there. So without further ado, guys, we are going to play the question and answer session, and then that is going to be it. And then we will be back to wrap everything up, and we'll be back soon.
Man, we can start. Okay. Okay. And welcome to the Q&A session / this is going on the Conspiranormal podcast. Guys, thank you for being here at the Strange Realities Conference. I want to thank all the people at the stage. Now, the way this is going to work, and the reason I said to kind of hold some questions that you guys may have, is that so we could do this at the end of the night. And Hallie over here has got the mic. You guys just motion for her whenever you need it, if you got any questions. But I wanted to introduce a couple other people. This is Brent Rains down here. It was too late for me to get him as part of this. If I had known that he existed 3 or 4 months ago, I would have definitely had him, because he only lives about 100 miles away from here.
That's correct.
So
I wasn't here earlier. I just sort of tulpered in, but I'm here now.
Yeah.
And this is Johnny McMahon, the owner of the Fringe Radio Network, which was the first podcast network that Conspiranormal was ever on, was the Fringe Radio Network. That's actually before he owned it, but he's been a big supporter. And I also want to introduce Dr. Future down here as well. Big inspiration for me, big mentor. Very important that he's here. And of course, you know, Timothy Renner, Tim Banal, Joshua Cutchin. This guy right next to me is Serfiel. He's my co-host. All right. And also, this guy right here was instrumental in getting this done. You know, he's been kind of in the background, but he's helped make this poster over here, this banner, which you guys need to take pictures in front of at some point. Mark Anthony Wyatt, Joe Damari, at the end, Guy Malone. So I want to, before we get questions from the audience, Brent, you've been here most of the day. You've been observing, and Johnny will tell you, you can kind of go on with this too. What do you guys thought about what some of the things that you've heard?
It was great. I love Joshua Cutchin. Great. I like the flat earth. Just great. How does he say that? You guys are beautiful people. It's just great. It's great. Believe me. No, it was great. I learned a bunch of things, and I'm proud to have you on the Fringe Radio Network.
Yes, sir.
And that's all.
Yeah. And Where Did the Road Go is on there as well. So, Brent, some thoughts, man. I mean, this guy right here has been a ufologist. He's been in all this weird stuff since he was like 14,
53 years.
And he's corresponded with guys like John Keel, which he has a book about, which you guys should buy in the back. So, Brent, any thoughts about what you've seen?
I'm very impressed. And you know, this was not the ordinary lineup you get to going to one of the mainstream conferences, UFOs or cryptozoology. I mean, those conferences are based on trying to prove a certain common belief system mainstream. And what I saw here was a real open-minded, objective exploration of all the different alternative possibilities that exist. And that's what, you know, my book on John Keel, he was one of those early pioneers. And it also has a foreword by Rosemary Ellen Guiley, who helped me tremendously to prepare the book and passed away just 5 days after it came out on Amazon. And she was, you know, one hell of a researcher. So anyway, thank you.
Let's open the floor for questions. So who's got a question? Sure, why not?
I'm sorry, I don't know anybody's name, so I'm just going to say.
Okay.
The Wildengeist person? Yes. Joshua.
The Wildengeist person.
So I'm just curious, like, you know, you were saying, like, you know, there's the whole poltergeist, and this is like a poltergeist in the wilderness, but you're not, I guess my question is, you're not in any way saying that all Bigfoot sightings necessarily are Wildengeist. There could be two separate things, right?
Right. I think it's a mistake that a lot of us make in talking about these things in general, is that we want them to all be one sort of monolithic thing.
Okay.
I mean, the longer I go into the UFO field, the more I start to separate things in the sky from the contact experience. Not that there isn't some overlap, there's a significant overlap. But I think we need to be comfortable enough with nuance to say that sometimes it might be a nuts and bolts flying saucer in the sky, and sometimes it's much more akin to a shamanic experience or something on a more spiritual level. I think Tim's a little bit less charitable of flesh and blood Bigfoot than I am nowadays. But one of the things that I've said oftentimes is that I wonder if there isn't something that is using sort of the Bigfoot thing as a mask. So if you look into the work of some people that I really admire, like Mike Cleland, who talks about owls. You know, Mike, it's not that Mike doesn't think that owls aren't really actual, you know, flesh and blood birds, but sometimes the owls are weirder. And sometimes I wonder if myself, with what I'm looking into, if there aren't actual large hairy hominids that are completely quote unquote natural running around the woods. And sometimes whatever this other intelligence is sometimes picks that up as a skin. Right. Again, I think Tim's not into that idea.
That would be accurate.
Yeah. But you know, excuse me. I try to sit with the reality of my own shortcomings. And yeah, so not necessarily all things, it's more of a thought experiment than anything else.
Right. Just another alternative theory.
Yes,
but not necessarily negating another theory.
Anyway. No, I mean, it might.
Right.
It might not.
But that's not your point. You're not trying to say this is the way it is and that's not the way it is.
No, I mean, there are very few things that I'll say that on. Cool. That I'll commit to like that. Yeah.
All right. Now I have another question, if I may, real quick, for the Nazi UFO person whose name I don't know. Sorry. So, just the thing that came right to my mind was, you know, back in 1947, you know, even before the space program, you know, when you're sending something out into space, monkeys or dogs or anything, you know, you're basically putting them on the top of a rocket and you're shooting that rocket up into space. You know, you have, you know, really, really ancient computers that are making it fly around and then it lands and you go get it. But, you know, to actually have something fly an aircraft in 1947, are you to think that they were putting a child or something? What was the pierogies?
Progeria.
Oh, progeria. Yes, like a child with progeria. And that is it thought that it was like an automaton or it's radio controlled because they weren't teaching the child to fly the plane, right?
Correct. I don't think so either. That radio and remote controlled possibilities have been included in this presentation in the past, and I've had people follow up with me, actually giving me documentation of where the technology for remote control was,
and that was available at that time.
And another thing that was happening was you were having to use real balloons, helium balloons, from that one photo I showed of Mike Heiser, just to get them off the ground, to where they might not have even been propelled, moving around in the way that we picture flying saucers going.
Taking them up.
They might have been floating just to see, can you get a human to 30,000 feet and they still survive? And just put it on a balloon to where they weren't actually piloting a craft. They were just in it as a test subject is the best theory to answer your question. I agree with you. It's a great question. It comes up often, actually.
If I recall, there was primitive drone technology used in World War II, right?
That is what I've heard also. I wasn't there, but.
Okay. Who else has a question?
It's all guesswork, given my age. It's all guesswork and a little bit of research too.
Okay, I'm very impressed by all your presentations, and Dr. Future, I'm very much familiar with you. Everything seems to be research based, but also experiential. And I just wondered if you would share some moment where you knew you had encountered the truth or something that drove you to continue this exploration.
Questions for everybody?
Yeah, well, who wants to take it?
I'm a childhood experiencer. I grew up believing I'd been abducted by aliens, so I would have had more than average motivation to get to the bottom line of the truth. And it's online at my webpage. I do an autobiographical thing of what all the stuff I believe happened to me in childhood. And it was way before Whitley Strieber ever wrote his book, but I was experiencing a lot of the same things. So I wanted to know the truth. Your question was, when did you arrive at the truth? And it was like, I don't know if I have today still. I'm still asking questions. I've got some answers, but because of my experiences and my desire to maybe stop them, I had more than the average impetus to want to get to the bottom of, are these really aliens? What's happening to me? How do I make it stop? So that's where it started for me as an experiencer, not as a researcher.
Well, I'll just speak about myself. At age 14, I got interested and I started collecting all the data I could get. And I had started by reading Frank Edwards' Flying Saucers Serious Business, which was the regular classic nuts and bolts mainstream theme of an extraterrestrial visitation. And so at that time, I thought, okay, it's either what the Air Force says, just weather balloons, temperature inversion of Venus on the horizon, has explanations that are natural, or it is actually the spaceships. And then I began to read articles by people like Jacques Vallée, the French-born scientist who had alternative ideas, and John Keel, who I've just written a book about. And I began to realize there were a lot of complexities to the situation, and I began to interview people myself and traveled across country to meet people, researchers, experiences. And I don't have the answer now, but I'm not as certain as I was when I was age 14 that I had figured it all out. And I just know that there's a lot more to it. I think that understanding more about physics and consciousness, and there's a lot of anomalies there that we haven't just figured all out. So I'm still exploring.
This body of research I'm doing that detects ghosts, I guess it was just Ghost Asylum about 4 years ago. I was invited to help the guys out. They saw me posting something called a ghost pad. I designed a thermal reactive pad for ghost footprints. That's probably useful in a lot of what you guys are talking about. But I took it to a conference. Nobody bought it. I was like, are these researchers serious? Because I'm showing them new technology, but nobody is really interested. So I gave a bunch of free ones out. Then the coolest thing was the Tennessee Wraith Chasers saw that the free stuff, and they called me and they said, Joe, we want your help in the technology part of our show. And ever since then, I knew I hit something big when I downloaded the MIT software that the MIT researchers were working on. Then I put in paranormal stuff on top of it. And ever since then, I see ghost hands coming out of walls. So that's through video. So I'm like, there's something here, and I can't stop not making it better. And I think it's maybe an evolution thing for me. Like, I'm just, instead of being bored walking around in a circle at the mall, I'm like, I need to do this. This is more interesting. So that's basically it for me. Just
Will,
MIT.
I mean, I know you, and you, even before you discovered any of that stuff, you had a lot of profound personal experiences.
Yeah, those really didn't make me want to like scientifically figure them out. They were just interesting, and I thought they were fake at first until
you didn't trust the experience.
Yeah, I want it.
Okay.
I want a computer to tell me that it's real, basically. Like it's more scientific to me, because you have tons of psychologists, saying that it's just in our minds. So I'm like, well, if a computer can say, you can't say that's fake. It's a computer, it's just a program saying, it's like redrawing a graph of the environment you're in. It's saying there's an anomalous structure here, and it freaking looks like a humanoid. I'm like, okay, so we're on to something. To me, yeah, the MIT was eye-opening. It said that there was something special, but my childhood stuff, mostly, I don't know. I can't say it's a dream is real. I just still cannot say that, but it possibly could be half real. So,
any question from the audience? Okay. This is Chris, by the way. He's going to be playing for you in just a second. Yeah, his last name is By the Way.
Yes, I'm Chris, by the way. So this is a question for any one of you up there. So do you believe that, like, an encounter with the supernatural, would it be an act of aggression against the human race, or like a random act, as if like a person were to come across like a bear in the woods?
this is the human race.
Terrence McKenna would probably say.
I think that we're so baked into what this is that it's inextricable from who we are. I don't think it's necessarily always good or bad. I just think it's part of the human experience, and I think that we've been suppressing it for the longest time. That's my own 2 cents. Anybody else?
What's the question?
I think it's in nature. It's something we're still discovering why and what it is and why it's there and what it's doing.
I don't really
know. Okay. All right. Anybody else have any questions?
Still getting over the fear thing.
Hey guys, I really thoroughly enjoyed the parts I was here for. Forgive me for missing some stuff, and thus my question might be, touching on something you already touched on, but something that kind of, I wouldn't say puzzles, but certainly makes me curious, the concept of how these beings might actually be us from the future. Is that something that a lot of people talk about?
Dr. Future. Here, I'll try that one. I mean, yeah, people talk about it. It's one of the, I think Brad Steiger had a list of like maybe 13 or more things that UFOs could be, and that's on the list. So it's entirely possible. It to me, I suppose it's just as plausible, I guess, as like that they're aliens from another planet, right? It stands to reason. We don't know what they are, so.
Well, getting away from the UFO part of it a little bit and talking about the paranormal encounters. I'm asking because I want to learn. I've learned so much from this already that I want to, talk to y'all at, when I get a chance behind the scenes here and get some references or, go look this up in the podcast or whatever. But do you think there's any chance that, well, of course there's any chance, that some of the ghost images that we might see or encounter could be a diminished self as a result of time travel?
Oh, interesting. So you're saying like that? You're saying like a ghost photo could be a time traveler? You're postulating that?
The gentleman that was talking about the technology was talking about how he has physically been able to see like a hand come through.
Right.
Yeah. What I'm saying is that has anybody discussed the idea that time travel would present to us a diminished self?
I see what you're saying. Yeah.
Could only manifest in what would look to us as a spiritual.
Right. Like say like a situation where like let's say like 100 years in the future, you can go into like a little room, and it'll project you as a ghost essentially, for lack of a better term, a hologram or whatever. Yeah. To the past. It's kind of the idea.
Yeah, I think it's possible.
You can come, but you can't bring your luggage. You know what I mean?
Yeah, as an observer, like so that way you can't interfere with the actual time. I mean, that's entirely possible. I mean, I don't see why not.
What would make sense with that from quantum mechanics is that you can send information faster than the speed of light and in time, but that's all you can send. You can't send material like physical material, but you can send information.
Which could be an image, right?
And that's what a hologram would be you're sending information. So they wouldn't violate any of the immutable laws about the past or perturb or anything like that. It's a very interesting idea you have there, is that you're basically being a watcher over what's going on possibly, Right. And it would be interesting if it worked in reverse too. And if you could get images that were really from then for you to view.
Sure.
So.
And you kind of pull it all out of the supernatural bit, or what people describe as supernatural. We've actually got technological advance that just blows our mind.
Yeah.
It kind of makes sense because they wouldn't want, if they could make time travel, they wouldn't want you going back into the past and breaking things. Yeah. So you'd have to be an observer, I think, presumably,
That would be safe. Yeah.
I'll add this about the time travel concept. There is a researcher, Paul Eno, that is out there. I know Brent is familiar with him. He does talk about what he believes that hauntings and ghosts are really just everyone exists that has ever existed exists at the same time. That time isn't actually real, if that makes sense. So yeah, there's no linear time.
I was just going to chime in while we're talking about this, how Tim and Josh, we've explored these ideas that the Bigfoot and these wild man archetypes are like could be our past self or some kind of relation to the ancient natural world, but then a lot of the alien UFO phenomenon could be like our future selves, and this is some kind of loop that all relates to us.
Yeah, I think there's one takeaway that you can sort of get from a lot of the speakers at this conference. It's that whenever a certain idea is so popular that it reaches critical mass in any subject, but particularly in the paranormal, I think it's important to draw the conversation away back to alternate hypotheses, because none of this is proven in any sense or fashion. Even the objective reality of this stuff isn't proven. So why should we bother marrying ourselves to the idea that Roswell was a crash flying saucer, or that Bigfoot is an ape, or that UFOs come from extraterrestrials? I think the idea that we should entertain ideas like ghosts might be time travelers, I think it's healthy to engage in that, regardless of necessarily how much evidence there is for that. And really, honestly, there's not any less evidence for that than there is for a lot of the more popular ideas. I think it's really healthy to sort of engage with that push and pull. And I think it's something that Adam's done a really good job. Adam and Serfield have done a really good job of bringing some people together who are bringing some alternative ideas to light. So kudos to you guys.
I'll sort of take the hit and go where a lot of us kind of are afraid to go, I think, publicly. But at this particular conference, the biblical or Christian worldview has not been underrepresented like it is at so many other conferences like this. And at the risk of being the simpleton in the group, a lot of the phenomena has been, by many researchers, Keel, Vallée, Carl Sagan, the word demonic has come up over and over again in all of our reading and all of our research. I don't want to reduce it to that as the only explanation, but for the sake of the podcast, for the archiving, every one of us has stumbled across it and we haven't disproven it. And we're not even motivated to disprove it. I think in this modern age, we just don't want to be the idiot that uses that word in a sentence in public anymore. But the other talk that I do that I think more known for than this Roswell one is Are Aliens Demons, or Evidences for Why Christian Fundies Call Aliens Demons. And like I said, I'd literally quote Jacques Vallée and Carl Sagan in that one too. A few of you have seen it. You're familiar with the point of view, but I want to, without being politically incorrect or whatever the word is, and without being a sissy, when you're talking about Bigfoot, they scream like a banshee from hell, and all the other quotes you used, poltergeists and all that stuff. And my experiences are stopping abductions because they're paranormal or spiritual experiences, not aliens. That's well documented in this field too. I don't want it to go ignored. I don't want to push it on anybody, but I don't want that view to go ignored here as well.
Well, something that's a very strong folkloric trend, sort of built off of that. There's no shortage of places in America that are devils so-and-so. The idea that, for better or worse, a lot of demons in the European tradition were regarded as sort of hairy wild men. They all sort of got conflated. Wild men and wild women were conflated with demons. And if you look to places nowadays that are devils so-and-so or demons so-and-so, you'll find a strong correlation with Sasquatch reportings there too. So I'm not discounting it. I'm as a Christian myself, I wrestle with this like literally on a daily basis. I try to carve out a little wiggle room for some stuff that's in between and not quite good nor evil. And I don't know if that's, again, I'm pretty sure that's not theologically sound, but I think that many of us can agree that there's a strong possibility of a spiritual component of some sort to all this. Yes, please.
As far as I'm aware, sorry. Okay, I thought you turned it off. Well, it's like a default position. It's always demons. You hear it on all these ghost shows. It's a demon, it's a devil, and there's all this language that's thrown about. But we know that, even if we accept the Jesus story and everything, if you go back, this stuff all existed before. Sorry, this stuff all existed before we had Christianity. So whilst I respect it, and I was brought up in the church, I just feel that it's just like the go-to position all the time. If it's bad, it must be demon. Why can't they just, instead, they're not necessarily bad. They could be energy vampires, whatever. They have a need to survive on whatever they're feeding on. What we see as bad might not necessarily be bad. But
You meet me on a bad day and I might be bad, right? Yeah.
no, I think that's about it. I can't get much further.
Okay. We got time for a couple more questions from the audience.
Okay, this is for Josh and maybe anyone else who wants to weigh in on like biblical interpretations of UFOs. You see Ezekiel's wheel reference, the wheels within wheels, and the beasts references a UFO encounter in some of the more esoteric writings, the more like New Age writing about UFOs. But most people don't talk about the part where the entity that Ezekiel thinks is the voice of the Lord gives him a scroll to eat, so he can carry the message to the Israelites. Does that story fall in with your food taboo series?
That's a great question.
That's a deep cut. Well done. Yeah. So yeah, I should have written about that in the book, and now I'm on the spot about it. I think it does. I think it speaks to a broader motif of internalization of, the other internalization. He just give you a Slim Jim. we need a holiday every time this year where like you pop in through my toilet and give me a Slim Jim, like some sort of reverse Santa Claus. It's amazing. Well, if you ate that Slim Jim, much as Ezekiel ate his, no, I think it speaks to sort of broader motifs of consumption as a means of internalization. I think that I would be somebody who would say that the von Daniken approach of the gods were aliens is sort of an inversion of a greater truth, which is that the aliens were gods. But in terms of that story specifically, I think it really speaks to that concept of consuming that which you wish to become and consuming that to internalize it and to sort of hopefully have an outward expression of what you put into your body. I mean, if you look at if you look at something I talk about in the book, which obviously because you cited me and called me out for it, this concept of eating the god is prominent in a lot of different cultures. The idea of taking something of the divine, in this case, not necessarily the flesh of the divine and consuming it to become in one sort of communion with the other, but rather to sort of take something that has been given to you, which is in some sense a little bit more palatable. But it's a great question, and I think that you're absolutely right. It's consistent with that motif. There was a story that Mike Clellan consulted with me about before his latest release, which was Stories from the Messengers, about a woman who was like compelled to eat some owl feathers. And this was a weird owl. This wasn't like an owl. This was like a Mike owl, which is its own thing. And after doing that, there was this whole like sort of shamanic thing that happened. So I think they're part and parcel. It's probably not as in-depth an answer as you were hoping for, but that's the best I got right now. So.
Okay. We got time, I think, for at least one more question. Heather.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, Heather.
I've spent a lot of time out in the hallway when I really wasn't expecting to spend that much time, but it was an enjoyable evening. So I missed if anybody spoke about it, but I recently picked up this book by a gentleman named Allegro, who talks about mushrooms as a divine vehicle and how the scriptures that are referencing food of the gods is actually speaking about mushrooms. If anyone would like to speak to that, I'd be delighted to hear your opinions.
So what was your question again? Specifically, I'm the food guy, the biggest guy at the
Hey, food guy.
Yeah. So specifically to mushrooms being the food of the gods.
Yeah, like mushrooms being actual, psychedelics as being the divine
there's
impetus.
There's such a robust history to unpack from there. I mean, if you take a look at sort of the presence of the mushroom, it sometimes appears.
It's my Terrence McKenna voice. There's some evidence that suggests that the fruit of the tree of knowledge was actually a mushroom. There's a fresco in one particular church in France that depicts that. Some people have taken this a step further to claim that early Christianity was actually, in fact, a mushroom cult, that they actually would exhume the bodies of dead saints and find mushrooms, which I don't know. I don't think the mushrooms you'd find growing on dead saints would be psychoactive, but maybe they were. And they would consume those, which is sort of where we get this idea of consuming the body and the blood and the flesh of Christ. The thing that Terrence McKenna talked about was his stoned ape hypothesis, which I'm not sure if that's in the book, but for anybody who doesn't know, the idea that apes as hunter-gatherers would sort of follow bovine herds, and the bovine herds would take a dump, and the dump would produce psilocybin, and small amount of psilocybin enhances visual acuity, so you have better hunting methods, and you also have in larger amounts the effect of glossolalia, which is the idea of just making up words on the spot. That sort of idea, and that the idea was that from that emerged into speech. I personally, as much as I love Terrence McKenna, I get his A to B, and I get his B to C, and I get his C to D, but when I try to draw A to D, I just don't see that connection being quite as strong. But I mean, the idea that the mushroom itself has not had some sort of forging role in mankind, I think would be to take that stance would be a little bit naive, because it does seem to have opened a lot of entheogenic interactions with what people would perceive as the other. Whether or not that is actually something divine, I don't know. Whether or not that actually is the other, I don't know. I'm inclined to believe that there's something more behind the psychedelic experience than just mere hallucination. That's my own personal opinion, having not done a single psychedelic in my life. But if I think the idea of the mushroom as being the food of the gods is there. I think there's some weight to that particular theory. And tune into History Channel.
Could I make a comment on that real quick?
Plus, Stoned Ape is a really excellent stoner rock band name for sure.
Stoned Ape, yeah.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Dr. Future.
If I could give the church lady fuddy-duddy answer, wet blanket, there may have been some fringe groups that would call themselves Christian. I'm sure probably they were. Even like today, where we have people that use ayahuasca in a sacred event that would even call themselves Christian. You've got all sorts of groups like Santeria and things like that are far flung. But I think historically, not only through Orthodox Christianity, but Judaism and their founding doctrines before, the whole core of sorcery was the use of ingesting of substances we now call entheogens that are for a ritual purpose to open these passages, and it was forbidden because it was an uncontrolled interaction with the spirit world and spirit beings. And it's sort of like when I had the privilege of speaking at a United Nations conference back in 2008 on religion and spirituality, and everybody else in the room, I think Edgar Mitchell was there, but the rest of them were spirit channelers and mediums and use these things. And I told them my understanding of history is when you have those interactions in the spirit world, you better check IDs. And so just like you don't go in a strange city and you go off in every alley with that, as a tourist and not expecting you're going to have a problem, if you don't know who you're interacting with, you better be careful. And that's because I really respect the effect that some of these can have. Sometimes maybe it is just a pure hallucination. Your brain is rewired and you're starting to smell, green or something. But in many cases, and I think certain things like ayahuasca and things like this and DMT, there are collective experiences that happen. You go back to not only in Genesis 6, which gives some of that information, but in the first book of Enoch, it makes it very clear that there are certain spirit beings who don't like us and who are jealous of us. They don't like our procreative capabilities. They don't like the favor that we were given. It's another kind of things to use in this means not for our good and as a doorway for them to exploit us. I have often wondered the fact that pure DMT, for example, as I understand it, won't work normally, will not activate your pineal gland.
If it's inhaled, it will. If it's ingested, it will not because of monoamine inhibitor.
Well, that's where I'm going.
Yeah,
That's where I'm going with this, the monoamine oxidase. And why they mix, as I understand it, MAOIs or inhibitors, inhibitors in the ayahuasca, so then it can have that interaction. I also understand that your regular digestive processes is what produces that inhibitor. And counterintuitively, extended periods of time of famine, where you actually, you don't take in food, can have a replicative effect. And that's why I think often, even Jesus said, he says, like some of these, like casting out demons, can only happen by prayer and fasting. But the key point is that when you're doing this, it's so effective that you better be talking to somebody in the spirit world, rather than just putting out, was it Tinder? I don't know. Use these things where you just sort of go out and find anybody. You don't meet.
Or Grinder, depending on what you're.
Well, yeah, I don't. I really don't. I'm the old fogey.
Manal's a big Grinder fan.
So
that's how we met, actually. No, I really like it. It was Dr. Future. I really like your alley analogy because I've often said that I don't think that anything about a Ouija board is necessarily inherently evil. Oh, hello. Oh, hey. Well, I don't think necessarily anything about a Ouija board is necessarily evil, but it's kind of like driving through a bad neighborhood with your windows down. And like sometimes I think like sleep paralysis is you're in a bad neighborhood and your car is stalled and your windows are down.
And
So
you got your wallet out, counting your money.
Yeah, exactly. So I think that's a really apt analogy. I completely 100% agree.
Every year, I invite Dr. Future to Oregon to go on a mushroom trip with me.
I would love to see that.
So he's talked about
Love
that,
to see
being
that.
with somebody he knows. So Doc, you can be with somebody you know. Okay. We'll fly
Yes.
back out to Oregon. They're in bloom right now.
It's really not the mushrooms I'm scared of. It's Johnny that I'm scared of.
Okay. Josh is like, call me. Okay, I'll hook up with you. Yeah, we'll be there. No, I was saved on mushrooms in 1983. Almost killed me. I took 150 of them, which the dose is 25. I boiled 150 of them down into a cup of cream of mushroom slime, and it almost killed me. I was in the hospital for about 3 days. And anyway, I was brought down. I went down into the ground like 300 feet, and with all the worms and the bugs. But they were killing each other, but not for food or survival, but for pleasure. And Jesus showed up and he goes, "This is sin." And that was the end of it. But that was the beginning of my walk. So I just love mushrooms.
I think that's
the only sad thing, Johnny, is I just wish we could say you were typical. It's hard to take Johnny data and apply it to the whole population. Yeah.
Tim.
It's hard to follow that.
The only thing with when you start talking about the Bible, it's like, to me, it's the same thing as when people say, "Oh, it's all jinn. The jinn explains everything." You're just giving different names for the same things we've been talking about folklorically forever. So if you're going to use the Bible as a proof, you first have to prove that the Bible is true. And you take it on faith, okay, that's your faith. But to the rest of us, it's the same folklore under a different name.
Right.
Well, I can't dispute that. All I'm just saying is that's the information I'm familiar with, and that's who I take credible. And I don't see a lot of people who take DMT, for example, see things that absolutely terrify and horrify them, but yet they still seem to be attracted to it, almost like an addictive effect, which I think a lot of alien abduction experiences have been described that way, where people are absolutely terrorized, but somehow they want their terrorizer to come back again. So there's a lot I don't understand about that, and I don't plan to find out if I can help it.
All right. I think it's the idea of the trial, of going through, coming out the other end of a negative experience.
Guys, I think we are out of time. That's a good place to stop. If you guys have any other questions, these guys are available for the next 2 hours. Feel free to talk to them. We have music. I do want to thank everybody on this stage. Dr. Future, Timothy Renner, Tim Banal, Joshua Cutchin, Sephiel Stevenson, Mark Anthony Wyatt, Joe Damari, Johnny McMahon, Brent Rains, and last but not least, Guy Malone. And I want to thank a few other people as well. Jason Von Stein, my cousin, came all the way here from Atlanta to film this entire thing. Okay. I want to thank Max and Hallie over here for getting the pizza, manning the front. And also, where's Luke? That's the question we always ask. Where's Luke? And this guy right here that made it all possible, give him a big hand, Mr. Robbie Lenz. This is the guy that there would have been no conference without this guy right in the back. So, Mr. Robbie Lenz. And this guy right here, my co-host, my partner in this whole endeavor. We have been through this thing for like 2-3 months. This guy is great. You guys get to know him. Please take a picture. We're going to take a group picture of the speakers and the staff and everything. But please feel free to take a picture by the banner. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you for coming to Strange Realities 2019, and hopefully there will be a Strange Realities 2020. Okay, we can leave that running for a little bit in the background. It's muted.
Yeah.
That was the Strange Realities 2019.
And there will be a Strange Realities 2020.
Yes. And in fact, it's coming up very, very, very soon here in the next 4 weeks from the time that we are doing this. And it's going to be on September 25th, 26th, and 27th of 2020. But we are doing it online, as you guys can see in the background there. And in the little right-hand corner, our little logo. And you can see on the banner, you can get the tickets at strangerealitiesconference.com. What do you think? Any impressions about last year? Anything that you noticed?
It's better than I remembered, yeah, because like you said, we were kind of busy most of the time, so we didn't really just get to watch all the presentations. We're just making sure everything was rolling. Just all the presentations were from really unique perspectives and shows the same spread that I think is a good representation of our show, of our podcast, Conspiranormal. And that's what we're trying to bring for this one too, except there's twice as many speakers this time, and even more of a diverse spread of topics. And it was just cool to watch this because we're all kind of isolated now and get to kind of relive that experience and all the camaraderie. And for all those presentations and that cool information, you have all these really cool hallway conversations when you get a few of these people together, and just really, I miss it. Hopefully we can kind of recapture some of that on the streaming event. I know we're going to have some interactive things and definitely give you all access to these speakers. But yeah, this is going to be like last year, just magnified.
Yeah, absolutely. And what we want to try to do, maybe some things in like maybe some Zoom meetings with everybody that's coming, that's going to be attending the conference. Yeah. We're going to be, do some hangouts. So we'll have time to do that, like especially like late at night after this conference. So we want to try to make it as like real as we possibly can. So same here. I was really busy, like I said before, just timing everybody, making sure things happened, making sure the pizza got there, making sure that people were checked in, all this kind of stuff. So I didn't get I didn't get a chance to really see a lot of it, and it was really great to just see these presentations and get the information that I missed a lot the first time. So we really put on I think something that was really good. And we had 40 people that came, and this year, because it is online, I believe, and nobody has to travel, we've already got 75 as we're doing this now. So guys, please, $20, check it out, www.strangerealitiesconference.com. I want to go through just real quick who we have this year. We have Brent Rains, who you guys saw. He's going to be speaking this year at this conference. Aaron Gullius from the Saucer Life podcast is going to be there. John Tinney, one of my favorite people from the ghost hunting, and was on an awesome show called Ghost Stalkers back in the day, and of course is involved with the Hellier crew now. David Metcalf, good friend of ours. He's going to be talking about folk magic material that is in his local area, which I think is going to be really interesting. Alan Greenfield, he's the author of Secret Cipher of the Euphonauts, is going to be there. Stephanie Quick, who's a writer and a blogger, and has been on our podcast, Conspiranormal, and several others like Project Archivist and other podcasts as well. Red Pill Junkie, good friend of ours from Where Did the Road Go? Radio Mysterioso. He's going to be talking about some unusual cases that people in the English-speaking world have not heard of very much. And Tim Banal is going to be back, and he's going to give a sequel this time to his speech that he gave in 2019, which is when he went to the conference that he talked about going to. He's going to talk about that, give his memories, kind of like a little travel log. Guy Malone is going to be back. Like we mentioned before, he is going to be giving his other talk about about aliens and demons. Timothy Renner will also be back. I'm not sure what Tim is going to talk about, but I'm sure it will be very, very interesting, and I'm sure it'll have something to do with the more magical side of cryptozoology. Kiki Dombrowski also has been on our show, as well as Badal of America. She is a witchcraft practitioner, and she's going to talk about some of her beliefs and some of the ideas about the calendar. Greg Bishop, host of Radio Mysterioso. He is not sure what he's talking about at the moment, but I'm sure it's going to be a really interesting presentation from him. And Jenny Ashford, our good friend from 13 O'Clock Podcast, she will also be there, and she will be giving a little bit of true crime flavor, talking about some murders that took place in St. Augustine that are unsolved. So I'm really excited about that. Mr. Recluse, also known as Steven Snyder, will be joining us. He will be giving a more kind of conspiracy themed presentation as well. We're really excited to have him. You're going to see what the guy behind the voice looks like.
The man behind the spider.
Also of the Farm podcast, which is a very excellent podcast people need to talk about. Jack Montgomery, Folk Magic Tradition. Now he and Tony Kale are doing a joint presentation. I believe Tony has part 1 of that presentation, and Tony has part 2, or Jack has part 2, and they're going to be talking about kind of folk magic and the supernatural
across a few different multicultural perspectives,
right? Like hoodoo, powwow, and all that. Joshua Cutchin kind of can be continuing some of the stuff in the paranormal Bigfoot realm. Is going to be giving his speech. Reverend Michael J.S. Carter, who we're really excited to have on, he's going to talk about UFOs and the Bible. So that'll be an interesting contrast to Guy's speech, I think. Dr. Future is going to be presenting this year, and he is going to be talking about some of the aspects and some of the interesting research that he has done for his Two Masters, Two Gospels series.
We're going to have to put a hard time limit on that one.
Yeah, we probably will. Ren Collier, who is an occult practitioner, good friend of the show. You guys have heard, if you listen to Conspiranormal, Where Did the Road Go? Then you guys have heard Ren several times. Ren is going to be talking about things about like the Hollow Earth and some of the mythology involved with that, I believe. And of course, the host of Where Did the Road Go, Soraya Askath himself, is going to be there.
His first conference.
It's his first conference, as well as Red Pill's first conference. Well, I think it's actually his second. He did a conference, I think, out in Baltimore, the Fortean Society, I think. But Soraya is going to be talking about, I believe, about time slips and how that's some weirdness in his personal life. So that's who we have at Strange Realities 2020. And guys, we hope to see you there. This time, not live like you saw before, but it is going to be a good time and very informative nonetheless. So join us for that. And guys, we just want to take a moment to tell you all about the Conspiranormal, about our show. We talk about various aspects of the paranormal, secret societies, the occult, conspiracy theory stuff, all kinds of different aspects of it. If you haven't listened to the show, we've got like about almost 330 episodes right now. So guys, go check it out if you're watching this in the future or right now.
And this conference that you saw of 9 presentations really gives a good kind of picture of that kind of broad range of stuff that we talk about. Always from we look at different unique perspectives, and we try not to be exploitative, and we really usually want to get to the bottom of mysteries.
Yes, we absolutely do. We do have a Patreon that you guys can find extra stuff. If you already listen to Conspiranormal, go join. It's only $1. All these presentations are actually on there right now. So okay, I think that's it. I don't have anything else to add, guys. We really hope to see you September 25th, 26th, and 27th at Strange Realities 2020. Talk to you later.